Yes, sir.
Now go ahead.
Okay, welcome everyone, people from the department as well as our guests today. I'm Whitney Dameron. I'm the chair of the Kansas Wildlife and Parks Commission. We appreciate the opportunity to meet at the K-State Alumni Center and look forward to your participation in our meeting today. We start out our meetings typically by the introduction of the commissioners, and I'm going to ask Commissioner Cross to my left to introduce himself and come down the row. Thank you.
Emmerich Cross, Kansas City.
Delia Lister, Pittsburgh.
Keith Mark, Baser, Kansas.
Warren Gefeller, Russell. Bruce Riedel, Ellenwood.
And I'm Whitney Dameron from Topeka. Thank you all for coming today. First of all, I guess to the Secretary or Curtis, are there additions or deletions to the agenda?
No, they're just, as we discussed, there's a little bit of a reshuffling, I guess we should mention here on the informational items. I think we need to move the Commissioner Big Game Draw permit drawing to last on that list. We'll still be doing it, but due to a technical issue, we need to wait till the end of our other discussions. But that's it for now.
Save the best for last. Very good. Now at a moment where we accept a motion for approval of the minutes from our meeting in November.
Motion to
Let's take a
approve.
look at those.
Motion to approve.
Commissioner Lister, second.
Very good. Assume there's no corrections or deletions. So although those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are accepted. Thank you. Moving right along, I think now it's up to you, Curtis. Chief Counsel Curtis Wired. Thank you. Regulations and promulgation.
Yes, hi, my name's Curtis Wired. For those of you I haven't met, I'm the still relatively new Chief Counsel here at Wildlife and Parks. The regulations and promulgation I have listed there, I've put their current status. The top two are on hold per HB 2648. However, I'll note that the non-resident waterfowl hunting item, I believe working with Commissioner Carpenter, will be put into a bill, or that's the intent, since that regulation would require ratification anyways, passage through the legislature. There's thought now that might be just done as a standalone bill to adopt those restrictions there. The remaining regulations you see there, I have listed with the Department of Administration. About 3 days ago, I was able to get them from the Department of Administration, and now they're with the Attorney General's office for legal review. So I'm working with them, hoping to keep them speeding along. Does anybody have any questions?
Any questions from the commission? Thank you.
Thank you.
And I did overlook the fact, Commissioner Will Carpenter is a state legislator and they have activity on the floor today. He said he would be on through the Teams link as best he could. So he may pop in and out today. We're now at general public comment. We do this twice during our meeting. So any of you who have an interest in addressing the commission and staff, feel free to speak now, or you could think about it and do it later on in our meeting. If you want to address us, please come to the microphone and identify who you are and tell us what's on your mind. So, yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Jeff Hancock, and I'm here today representing Kansas Hunters for Access. I think some of you have put in your space a little invite and some information about an event we're having here in a couple of weeks or in a month or so. But I just wanted to give you an update. I was here about a year ago to introduce our organization to the department and the commission. We're a 501c3. Our primary goal is to enhance relationships between landowners and hunters. And so we do this right now. We're doing this by hosting these appreciation dinners. We've had 2 appreciation dinners. We had one last February and another in August. One was in Washington, one was in Hutchinson. The one coming up in February this year is in Claflin, Kansas. And at these dinners, we host WEHA cooperators. At the dinners, they come, we feed them for free. We get items donated that we give to them. So between dinners and giving stuff away, we've given away about $4,300 of stuff. And all they got to do is just show up. So, it's been pretty good. We've had a great response to it. My goal today was just to update you on what we're doing and make you aware that we're doing it. And, stand here for any questions that you might have about what we are up to, so.
Thank you very much. Questions from the commission?
I know, but I would just say that I think that's awesome, trying to bring hunters with landowners, like that's a great idea. Offline, I'll talk to you, my not-for-profit Hunter Nation will be willing to donate some stuff to help you with your events.
That'd be
So just
fantastic. Thank
reach
you.
out to me in my personal capacity and we'll help you there.
I'm unfortunate that I work here in town, so I gotta go back to work.
Yeah,
But
but I'm
I'll
easy to
reach
get
out
hold
to
of
you.
online.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I'll give you my card.
Okay.
You can reach out to them.
Jeff, what's your membership numbers at right now?
So we're non-membership based. We have volunteers that help us. We have about 40 of them signed up. We're a board of 4. And we did that we're doing that on purpose. For number one, I don't want to deal with handling memberships. Usually that revenue is not enough to really make a difference. And number 2 is we want to keep our goal focused on the WEHA program. We don't want it to be clouded by any other items that might be of interest to hunters, at least through that group.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for coming today.
You bet.
Anyone else like to address us at this point in time? Well, hold that thought and we'll get back to you here in a little while. Thank you so much. Mr. Secretary, it's time for your remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, members of the public, my esteemed colleagues, most times in January, we all kind of take stock and where we've been the last year. Most of us do this on an individual level. We also do that within the agency. And I thought it would be a good topic today. And if I shared an overview of the 2024 highlights at the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, it demonstrates our dedication to conserving and enhancing Kansas natural resources for the benefit of both current and future generations. From hunters and anglers to bird watchers and adventurers, Wildlife and Parks offer sustainable outdoor recreation that fosters a deep connection between the people and our natural world.
You should be able to.
It's only appropriate we start out with fisheries, right? Fisheries sustain healthy populations and manage public access at more than 300 water bodies across the state. These water bodies accommodated 4.6 million trips last year. As I give these statistics, I want you all to think about your own personal time that you've spent outdoors, how much it's meant to you. And it's more than just trips. It's really about the memories that were created during this time. Our public lands for hunting, fishing, and recreation saw 4 million visits last year at 177 public lakes and wildlife areas that spanned over 412,000 acres within the state. Our 29 state parks delivered safe and enjoyable outdoor experiences for 7.3 million visitors last year. They spent 423,000 nights camping underneath the stars and trekking 543 miles of walking, hiking, and biking trails. Our educational programs taught Kansas how to safely enjoy the outdoors, certifying 11,000 students in hunting and boating safety, delivering 280 in-school programs, and welcoming 250,000 visitors to our nature centers. We serve roughly 560,000 licensed hunters and anglers, Our Ecological Services Division reviews 2,000 proposed development and water projects each year to safeguard Kansas ecosystems. And our 88 game wardens patrol 1.3 million miles to uphold fish, wildlife, and boating laws. Our wildlife biologists implemented 557 Habitat projects and managed 1.1 million acres of voluntary walk-in hunting access on private land. All while monitoring wildlife populations and conducting research to inform the state wildlife regulations that we discussed at these very commission meetings. More than 16 million memories each year have been made in our parks, hunting grounds, fishing lakes, nature centers, and more. As I recently told the Kansas legislature, it is an honor of a lifetime to serve as the Secretary of the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. And I thank each of you for your dedication, collaboration, and your commitment to preserving these resources for our citizens and visitors alike. Thank you all. Oh, one update, a fiscal update. We have been spending a lot of time over at the legislature. They are currently now reviewing our budgets, and I'll have more to report as they approve our budgets in the future. Thank you.
Okay, before you sit down, put you on the hot spot. Are there any questions for the commissioner from the audience or the secretary from the audience? Got off easy. I did that quick, so just keep moving.
I would rather wait. Are you sure? Thank you all.
Thank you so much. We're at the point for the legislative update. I know Martin DeBoer usually would do this. He is in the Capitol. I think they're doing your budget today. So wish him success. And with that, Curtis Wired will offer some comments though.
Yes, I'm going to do my best to fill in here. I can't do as well as Martin, but I'll try to hit some of the high points here on legislative items that we're tracking. The main one is HB 2147 and HB 2028. These bills deal with reinstituting the resident senior combination hunting and fishing passes that expired pursuant to its own terms back in 2020. So both of these bills address that, would reinstitute those, allowing for us to charge basically the minimum amount that we need to recoup federal funds for those licenses over that 10-year period. There are HB 2063 establishes a conservation fund. That one will be held, or a hearing will be held in Ag and Natural Resources on Wednesday, February 5th. That's one to keep an eye on. There's SB 80, which would eliminate the authority of the Secretary of Wildlife and Parks to issue non-resident landowner deer permits. That's one that's on the radar. And of course, as the Secretary just alluded to, HB 2007 is the legislative budget bill, which is where Martin is now dealing with JCSB C, and House Ag and Natural Resources heard that, met yesterday, but because of scheduling conflicts, that was put in today. So he's there dealing with that. And those are the high points I have right there.
What's the conservation bill number again?
The conservation bill is HB 2063.
2063. And what's the highlight?
You know, honestly, I think that one was introduced by outside groups, so we haven't been involved in it. I know that it establishes various conservation funds that can be used within wildlife and parks, but we're not directing that legislation in any way or involved in advocacy on it. So
Okay.
that's as much I can speak on it.
Any questions for Curtis from the audience or the commission? Thank you so much,
Thank you
Curtis.
very much.
Now going into informational items, we'll go to item number B. Delaying the big drawing permit is noted earlier until the end of our meeting. Quail eye worm research from Jeff Prendergast. Thank you, Jeff. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. So over the last several months, we've started to get a lot more questions in relation to eyeworms, particularly as they pertain to bobwhites. I know some of you have seen some of that as well. That's been forwarded to me. So we thought we'd take a minute to talk a little bit. So the interest in eyeworms really started about 10 years ago when some researchers in Texas started to pay a little bit more attention to them down there. The Texas Rolling Plains is an area that's well known for high abundance of bobwhites. In 2012, they had what they thought were conditions that were conducive to produce a population increase. However, the fall surveys did not result in fact, they saw a slight decrease during that time frame. So these researchers felt like there might be something else that could help explain that story. So they went to look for this smoking gun. One of the things that they found was that the Rolling Plains region had extremely high infection rates for eyeworms and a relatively high parasite loads for the birds that were infected. So what is an eyeworm? This particular eyeworm is a parasitic nematode that lives in the orbital cavity of birds. It's an avian specialist, so it doesn't infect mammals. Humans aren't at risk of getting it. It follows an indirect life cycle, meaning that it lives in the eye cavity of the bird. The eggs are expelled with the feces, picked up by arthropods, where the eggs hatch, develop into larvae. Then once the bird then ingests those bugs, then those larvae develop into the adult, completing the life cycle. So with this interest in eyeworms kind of picking up here about 10 years ago, we thought it was prudent for us to do a little bit of checking into what our current infestation rates were in Kansas. So in 2018, we collected heads from hunter harvested birds during the season. We were able to collect samples in 60 of our 105 counties, so roughly about half. We included all up in game birds, not just bobwhites, because these eyeworms do infect multiple species, and so any of them could contribute to the infection rates of their own populations as well as other populations. So, and as we collected these heads, they were frozen until later for later lab work where we could dissect them and look at infection rates. So this map is just showing our sample distribution where we collected heads at. So we had a total of 283 bobwhites heads collected during that sampling period. White counties had zero heads that were submitted, all the way up into the red where we had the 5 or more heads submitted from those counties. Thank you for taking any questions. We're right up to the pheasant sample distribution, if you want to get me there, Jason. So similarly, this is a map showing the distribution of samples that we took for pheasants. We had 218 total samples taken for pheasants. Again, white counties showing where we had no samples, up to the red counties where we had 5 or greater. As you can see, we had a pretty good even distribution across the primary range of pheasants for our sample. We also received a few scaled quail, all coming from Morton County, and a few prairie chickens, all coming from Butler County. So the heads were then dissected in the lab following the procedures that we learned from the Rolling Plains researchers from Texas. They did a training on this at Quail 8 where we were at. What we found was we had relatively low infection rates. So out of our 283 bobwhites, we only had 12 positives for eyeworm infections, which was about a 4.2% infection rate. Pheasants were slightly higher, but still not that bad, 31 positives out of 213. So with the 12.5% infection rate, we did have 3 positives in scaled quail and 2 positive prairie chickens, but sample sizes for those species was low enough that then it's really hard to talk about what an actual infection rate would look like in those populations.
Question.
Yes.
How fast, go back to that. How fast does it spread once it finds its way into an area? I mean, if it's a low infection rate 5 years ago, would you assume it's still a low infection rate, or could it spread rapidly?
I think so we've known about these eyeworms for about 100 years. It's not like they're a new parasite in the landscape. So I think this is where we've probably been at. I don't have any reason to assume that there's been any change in that. We've only looked at it one time, so we have some baseline data now where we could look at those changes, but we have no reason to think that there was anything that's changed the infection rates over time.
Okay.
So the infection intensity or the number of eyeworms per infected individual is relatively low as well in Kansas. Predominantly, most of the birds that were infected had a single eyeworm, and we only had one bird that we found with more than 6 eyeworms, and that was one single bobwhite that had 28 eyeworms, which is what is in the vial there to the right. So this is the distribution of the infection. We also had a pretty even spread of where the infected birds occurred. So each of these heads represents a single infected individual. The pheasant heads are pheasants, the bobwhite heads are bobs, and so on and so forth. But what we saw was a pretty even distribution across the area where we collected samples. There wasn't any concentration or anything where we had any particularly concern on any one region. So out of this, we saw relatively low infection rates, low parasite loads, and even distributions. We didn't come out of this research with any real great concern at all. So fast forward to today, the researchers in Texas have continued to do their to work on this parasite, and they've gone as far as to develop a medicated feed to treat for the eyeworm. This received FDA approval this year, which got a lot of press, which is kind of the precipice for all the additional questions that we've been receiving lately. The active ingredient is fenbendazole, which is a common anti-helminth. If you use a wormer for your dog, this is most likely what you're using. The recommendations for this product is it needs to be used in feeders because it breaks down quickly in the environment. So they recommend to use 1 feeder per 200 acres. You need a 21-day treatment period. And then they recommend 2 treatment periods a year, 1 in the spring and 1 in the fall. So when we consider parasite infections, there's a few things that we need and treatment of them. When there's a few things we need to take into consideration. One, parasites do have the potential to reduce an individual's fitness, and by fitness I mean survival and reproduction. Treatments can reduce parasite loads and infection rates. We commonly use this with domestic animals, and reducing parasite loads can potentially increase an individual's fitness. But one thing we also need to remember is that an individual's fitness doesn't necessarily lead to a population change. So also, there hasn't been really any strong scientific evidence to show that the eyeworm has had any negative impact on individuals' fitness, or that treating for the parasite has resulted in any population level increase or individual fitness increases. So, is this working or are you doing it?
It's like 50-50, so I'm just.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just.
You guys get along.
Yeah. So, something to remember with bobwhites is that they are they have a low annual survival. We estimate about an 18% annual survival. So a lot of things kill quail. That's the one thing that the quail are good at is dying. So We consider them our selected species where adult or survival or individual survival isn't as important to the population as annual production of young is. This is also the reason, a lot of what we use for justification for our hunting regulations, where we have a fairly liberal, daily bag limits, long seasons, and the reason we don't make changes to the regulations frequently when the populations go up or down is because that the survival of those individuals doesn't mean as much of the population as the production the following year. So parasites could be a part of this story, but again, a lot of things kill quail. This is not a new parasite. As I was mentioned before, we've known about it for about 100 years. It's been widely documented across a number of species across the country, ruffed grouse, prairie chickens, most of the game birds, several non-game birds as well. So evidence from other game birds has suggested that it has not had a impact. Eyeworms have not had an impact on fitness. This is a study out of K-State on lesser prairie chickens in the early 2000s, where they found 95% of the birds that they were looking at were infected with eyeworms, and they compared individuals with low infection load or low parasite loads to high parasite loads, and they found no difference between those birds in any measure of fitness that they looked at, total mass, survival, movement, or any reproductive measure that they looked at. On top of this, following this 2012 time period where the Rolling Plains region thought that they should have had an increase, within a couple of years, they actually set record population abundances on their survey. That we also saw across much of the Great Plains. So Kansas, we saw modern day highs in that 2016, 2017. Iowa, Nebraska, Oklahoma all saw large increases during this time frame. And this suggests that the birds are still maintaining the ability to respond to conditions when the appropriate conditions exist. What we do know is that we've had well-documented long-term range-wide declines that have been related to habitat loss through a multitude of research. Any other impacts to habitat is secondary. If you don't have habitat in place, nothing else that you're going to put on put on the landscape is going to have an impact. That's why a lot of our focus tends to be on habitat. These things like medicated feed or other practices can kind of build this silver bullet, what I consider a silver bullet mentality that kind of distracts from the primary issue of habitat. Creating and maintaining habitat is difficult. Putting feed out is easy. If you think you can put feed out and come up with the answer, your people tend to be more likely to do that than the work that it takes to create and maintain habitat over the long term. So there's a few potential concerns as well with the feed as far as what it can and can't do. The fact that it is recommended to be used in feeders because the active ingredient breaks down in the environment. There's been a lot of work on feeding quail in the Southeast where they do very intensive quail plantation type style. One of the things that they found is that if you are going to feed quail, it should be dispersed, not in a centralized location, because by concentrating birds, you can increase predation impacts on those birds. And so any gains that you would potentially get out of feeding, you can lose because of the increases in predation. These are wild animals. These aren't domestic where it's easy to control the dosages. There's dangers in both having treating too little or too much, particularly like for birds, there's potential for it to disrupt feather development. If dosed at the wrong time or too high. We don't really know much about what non-target exposure risk is right now. So this is a anti-helmet that's being placed in the environment, open access. So it's likely to think that rodents and other critters are going to also have access to the feed, not just quail. And then we don't know how that's going to affect the food chain if those individuals are consumed or not. So there's a lot of questions that are unanswered there. And then as far as us as a statewide management agency, how do we use something like this at a meaningful scale? Whenever you're talking about a feeder per 200 acres and we have quail statewide on 52 million across 52 million acres, how would we use something like this as a meaningful scale? So our recommendation, like for the research that we've currently seen, we don't have any major concerns on parasites. It's good information. It's something that we need to continue to look at all these potential impacts. But right now, our current recommendations based on the information we have available is that we want to focus on habitat. There's a reason that our habitat program is named Habitat First, and that's because habitat is the first thing that you need to put in place. If you come to me, if a landowner comes to me with $1 in his hand to invest in quail, my recommendations will continue to be into habitat, because regardless of, even if you can show that there is a benefit to the pesticide or the anti-helmet, that's going to be a very short term versus you're going to get a better return on investment if you invest that money into habitat, where you can get multi-years over across multiple individuals. So with that, I will thank you for your time, and I'll stand for any questions.
Very informative, Jeff. Do we have questions first from the commission?
Jeff, will these slides be on the website?
Yeah, I won't get them to Sheila. Okay. I will get them. Yeah, we'll put them, and they'll be in the briefing or the minutes, I believe. Is that how that goes? Or
It'll be on the website.
okay.
Okay, thank you.
Very good.
I appreciate the presentation. You know, I got a few phone calls on this, and it was hot and heavy there for a little while, and this should answer the questions of those constituents that had those questions. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And I also do appreciate the presentation, and I like your approach. Obviously, habitat is almost always the answer when it comes to wildlife conservation, but I do appreciate the fact that you recognize that there are times that feeding wildlife is a, you know, a tool in the toolbox of conservation. So I do appreciate those comments.
Further questions from the commission?
Yeah, I've got one. Stuart Strong, Deputy Secretary out of Pratt. Jeff, you might have mentioned this in your presentation. You and I have talked about this. Any particular physiological behaviors that you see in these birds that have this infestation? If you remember, I called you a few years ago about a quail that just randomly flew into my garage, and I had just actually come from a symposium on Rolling Hills. So any research on that?
So I haven't seen anything that's been, I mean, it's hard to imagine that when you get the high intensity that those birds aren't impacting vision. You'll see I mean, if you can go online and find the worst of the worst pictures where it looks like spaghetti coming out of their eye with the number of eye worms that are actually in there. There has been some speculation that there's potential for it to damage the optic nerve, again, at higher parasite loads. But which, you know, at that point, if they're flying blind, you could easily see that. You know, even in poultry, it's like the poultry industry, eye worms are considered mostly a benign infection. It's mostly it's considered mostly to be a mild discomfort to them. You will see them itching at the eye a little bit, you know, which may make them a little less prone to or aware of surroundings, has been kind of the speculation, but it's mostly an irritant to them. Yeah, at extremely high levels, we would expect some impact to vision. Thank you.
Do we have questions from the audience, or Jason, anyone asking a question online?
At this point, sir.
I got a quick question. How do you collect your samples, and can you see that visible? I mean, I quail hunt a lot. Do you see those worms visible to the naked eye for the average hunter out there?
Sir, can you step up to the mic so we can hear you online?
Mr. Miller, please follow our protocol.
I apologize. My question, just curious whether or not you can see those with the naked eye and how you collect your samples.
So for the to answer your first question, yeah, I mean, my first slide, it showed, you know, us holding a tweezer over the top of them. I mean, they're almost as long as a penny, so you can kind of see them. Typically they're under the neonicotine membrane, which there's a second eyelid. So if you can either use like a toothpick or something, for most of the worms are gonna be, if they're infected, most of the time they're gonna be in there. So you can take like a toothpick, or we had a probe that would just we could kind of swipe in there. But what we were actually doing was we were doing full dissections of the head, removing the eye, looking on all surfaces of the eye and behind in the orbital cavity, within all those structures where the eye worms can possibly persist, because they can actually migrate between orbital cavity. They migrate down to the esophagus to lay eggs. So there is some movement of those, but a lot of times they end up in the corner of their eye. In extreme, in high parasite loads, a lot of times if you kind of massage the edges of the eye right after shooting a bird, like they'll work their way out, just from you putting pressure on them, trying to get away from that. But and there's a few tutorials online that show kind of how you can do that. But yeah, I mean, especially if there's high parasite loads, they're pretty easy to see. But again, like I said, we did full dissections, removed both eyes and everything. So.
Thank you, Jeff. Very informative. Appreciate your work.
Thank you.
We're now going to talk about the prohibition of trail cameras on public lands. We've got Ryan Stuckey going to talk to us about that.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chairman and members of the Commission. I'm Ryan Stuckey, the Public Lands Director out of the Pratt office. I'm here today to provide information as it relates to the implementation of the regulation addressing the prohibition of trail cameras on department lands and walk-in hunting areas. The regulation went into effect April of 2023, and we felt that given the regulation 2 full primary or winter hunting seasons, after that we could provide some feedback to the Commission and the public on the overall effects of the regulation. And again, this will just be a summarization of it. I want to start out by reading the regulation. It's only going to take me a minute. I want to read it because we don't have a handout on it and it's not in the briefing book. And I just want to go over it in case there's some questions about what's actually in the regulation. So 115.825, trail or game cameras and other devices. No person shall place, maintain, or use a trail or game camera on department lands, or any images or video from a trail or a game camera, including location, time, or date, for any purpose on department lands and waters, including walk-in hunting areas, which we call WEHA, and integrated walk-in hunting areas, which is called IWEHA. It's also interactive walk-in hunting areas. For the purpose of the regulation, trail or game camera shall include any remote motion activated or infrared camera in which the shutter is activated by sound triggers, proximity sensation, radio transmitters, or a self-timer built into a trail camera or game camera. No person shall use any images of wildlife produced by or transmitted by a satellite to aid or in taking of wildlife, or to locate wildlife to take, or to aid in the taking of wildlife on department lands and waters, including WEHA and IWEHA. The subsection shall not prohibit the use of mapping systems or programs. For the purpose of this subsection, take shall have the meaning specified in KSA 32-701, amendments thereto. This regulation shall not apply to any trail or game camera that is owned by the department or designated agent and is used for the department operations or research on department lands and waters. Now, what I want to get into is why did we get to the proposed regulation? And first off, I'd like to mention that Kansas is ranked 49th in the nation with having the second to the lowest number of acres of public land. There are many challenges that go with such a small amount of land available for public use. Law enforcement and user conflicts are two of the issues that come with the many people that access and use our properties for multiple purposes. As trail cameras became more popular, we started to experience additional problems on our department lands and walk-in hunting properties. Public land managers, wildlife biologists, and game wardens started to voice concerns to our administration with the trail camera issues. I want to go over some of the concerns and issues that were brought to our attention, which finally led to a proposed regulation. And there's a little bit of a timeline because I kind of want to talk a little bit about pre-COVID, and that's when a lot of our staff over several years was coming to us with some of the concerns. So I'm kind of talking about what was talked about prior to 2020. And staff voiced concerns of wildlife disturbance, thefts of camera, multiple cameras in areas, which led to monopolizing certain areas, Some people expressed they felt uncomfortable using the areas with cameras. There's some privacy issues with that. Cameras on trees not associated with owners of the stand, and I'm gonna explain that a little bit. So let's say there's a stand, somebody puts a stand up and somebody else goes in that doesn't own the stand. We had hunters putting cameras by other people's stands. And then it was causing the conflicts between the owner and the person putting the camera up. We also had complaints on cameras focused on tree stands. So we actually had people putting cameras on other trees or some form where they mounted it, and they would point it at the tree stand or put it in other trees, and they would videotape other hunters, or they would see if that tree stand was available. But then it started to get to the point where we had folks looking at cameras, cameras looking at cameras, cameras looking at tree stands, cameras looking at hunters, and that became an issue. Also, I mentioned privacy issues as well. Increased pressure on user conflicts. Cell cameras and real-time imagery was getting more popular before 2020. It was ramping up. Private landowners in Weehaw not wanting the cameras on their property. There was a lot of complaints from the landowners that we had a lot of folks coming in and out of those fields and pastures, checking these cameras on walking hunting areas, and it did disrupt the farming practices. And also the farmers were just getting frustrated with that. And so they were voicing their opinions to the wildlife biologists and to some of the game wardens. And so that became an issue as well. And just the overall traffic of Weehaw, when them cameras came in there, it really turned things around there. And there was some privacy issues with the farmers. The farmers didn't like had their picture taken with their farming practices and also their livestock. And they felt that this regulation did help. It's one of the things where they felt uncomfortable with all those cameras on their property. And then it became where we found out there was some images being sold from the cameras, which led to some commercialization and just the overall technological advances with these cameras. That's what we first started. And it just kept reoccurring and just kept ramping up and getting more and more as we talked about these cameras. In 2020 and 2021, as we all know, COVID, but we were having more internal meetings. We also met with the the Wildlife Division, Law Enforcement Division, and what it would look like if we drafted a regulation and what came along with that regulation. We also had meetings with the Midwest Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies to discuss trail cameras. Dustin Mangarelli was one of our representatives there. He sat in many meetings and talked about the trail camera issues around the nation, basically. Moving on to the proposal. The proposal was first presented at the commission meeting in January 13th of 2022. It was in just general discussion, and it was in explaining that the KDWP's intent to introduce the regulation prohibiting the use of trail or game cameras on department lands in Weehaw. There were 7 more commission meetings where information was provided prior to the hearing on March 9th, 2023, where the motion of the regulation was approved. The regulation went into effect April 6th, 2023. So what are we seeing since the implementation of the regulation? I listed several concerns and issues when I talked of the history that got us to the proposal of the regulation. Again, we wanted to give the regulation 2 primary or winter hunting seasons to evaluate the effects the regulation had and concerns and problems previously mentioned. There have been some negative complaints that our land users have voiced in not being able to use trail cameras. There have also been many positive comments from our users that like the prohibition on cameras on department lands and Weehaws as it relates to the concerns first mentioned. Wildlife and Parks is very satisfied with the general information our law enforcement division and game wardens have provided, our public land managers have provided, and also that our wildlife biologists have provided. Kansas Department of Wildlife feels we are in a better position now with law enforcement issue, user conflicts, and the Weehaw landowners' concerns. Therefore, the department is not recommending any changes to the trail camera regulation at this time. Thank you for allowing me to provide this information. I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ryan. Do we have questions from the commission?
I do. Do you find the trail camera prohibition provides any conservation benefit to the wildlife or the habitat?
We've discussed that, and we cannot, the use of trail cameras it isn't a management, we don't use it as a management tool for the herd or
So
the
that'd be no.
populations.
So the answer to that would basically be no. Do you find the prohibition of trail cameras to improve hunting safety? Has there been any correlation to that?
I'm not aware of that.
And just in general, I'm philosophically opposed to more regulation than less. And I'm always suspect of conservation or wildlife management that either doesn't promulgate sound science-based conservation, which you said this doesn't, or hunter safety or public safety, which you says this does not. And so I just hate picking and choosing winners and losers in promulgating conservation laws and regulations that don't improve habitat, don't improve wildlife management or conservation, or is not a safety issue. So that'd be my general thoughts on the matter.
Other comments from commissioners?
So, the regulation doesn't prevent access, right? People can still use public lands and WEHA lands like they always have.
Yes, sir.
So the downside to the user is what? They have to work a little harder to hunt, maybe? I mean, what's the downside to the regulation?
Well, I guess the privilege of using a trail camera, which you can't, would be the downsides of it.
Yeah.
Outside of it.
Yeah. So that the advantage of a trail camera, it doesn't contribute to any of the things she's mentioned either. I mean, having them doesn't contribute to the conservation or correct? I mean, you don't see a correlation either way, whether they're there or not there.
On the conservation now.
Right.
If you want to talk about safety, a conflict is a safety issue. So if we have members of the public out there and they're in conflict,
Mhm.
then that is a safety issue.
Mhm.
Now, as far as the conservation management, a trail camera, we're not saying that it does have a conservation component to it.
Mhm.
Does that answer your question?
Kind of, yeah. I just struggle to see the downside, and I kind of understand the purpose of the regulation. I was, here for all those workshop sessions and all the public comments, which pretty much favored prohibition, and as I recall. And I understand the landowner issue, particularly on the WEHA land. And a lot of landowners don't want those cameras on their lands. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out if there's any downside, enough downside to reconsider it, and I don't see any.
And I'm not taking a position either way on it. I'm just pointing out that whenever you impose regulation on we the people, there ought to be a really good reason for it. And I listen to you and I think, when you talk about increased traffic, okay, people increase traffic to go check trail cameras. But then you say, well, it's a little more work. You got to scout. Well, if the person that scouts, that's increased traffic. Can't have it both ways. And so you talk about, well, it might increase conflicts. Well, when a guy puts a tree stand on a piece of public ground and leaves it, and the guy shows up, I mean, I've hunted a lot of public land in my day, from tree stands. And I mean, that's obviously when you're inviting we the people to come on to utilize the land, that you're inviting that type of a situation. Walking quail hunting, same thing. And I'm sure we've all heard a lot about and we're going to talk about this, about the out-of-staters on duck marshes and infringing. So anytime you have open public hunting grounds, there is going to be that sort of a conflict. My statement is more general in that I personally think regulations should be placed only when necessary. I think we the people do not need the state's boot on our neck when it comes to how we hunt, where we hunt, what we hunt with. And I'm not saying that I'm not taking a position on this topic. I'm just saying I understand. I listen to both sides. I've had several calls on both sides of this issue from people that oppose it, people that are for it. And again, when you start picking winners and losers, sights on crossbows, muzzle loaders with more than 2 power. I mean, the more you start regulating how we, the people, exercise our right to this great lifestyle, I'm always taking the road of caution. That was my only comment. I'm not saying I'm for it or against it. I'm just giving a cautionary word of wisdom, in my opinion. That's it.
Thank you. I'd like, at this moment, I'd like to welcome Commissioner Carpenter, who is online with us in the State House office. If you have anything you'd like to say, otherwise, I do want to recognize you are here and you may check in from time to time. There we go.
Commissioner Carpenter, you accidentally put yourself back on mute.
There, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, very good. No, I don't have any. I apologize for not being there. I'm in the middle of a big vote here in the deal and called to final action from time to time, and so I'll be in and out. So good to see everybody and everybody there, and I appreciate it. And I'm sorry that I'm not there.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Do we have questions from the audience? We may have comments on this, but first I'll ask if we have questions from the audience, and then we'll follow up with people who may have general comments as well. The other Mr. Miller sitting in the same row, Sean.
Thank you, Commissioner Dameron. Thank you, Commissioners. I appreciate it. It won't be any surprise to those of you who have been at this committee mission, at the commission meetings for a while now, that I'm probably going to talk about this for a little bit. So, Mr. Chairman, you sort of let me know. First of all, I want to really appreciate it. This informational session, I've been asking for a couple of years to chat about this, and so I appreciate the data. I would like to point out, because not all the commissioners are the same, this is actually the first time that we've had a public presentation about what the actual issues were. We had a general statement. We talked about 7 meetings where we workshopped this. I won't go through that a lot. Talked about that October of last year. For 5 of those 7 meetings, there was no public notice. There was 1 public comment through the entirety of the session. That was at the first one where there was made public notice. That was in favor of the reg. And then there were 2 comments the day the reg was adopted in opposition to the reg. So 7 full meetings, no questions from commissioners. The only question we ever had from the commissioners was related to drones and whether this applies to drones or not. 3 comments, 1 in favor, 2 against from the public. So I won't get into sort of the public notice. I really appreciate the fact that I think the agendas have changed a little bit. They've become a little bit more proactive so people can understand and see what it is that we're talking about. I actually met with the secretary last week, provided him some information from Nevada. Oh, sorry to the folks, I don't never get that quite right. On how they present their regs, the background of it, the detail, the issues they're trying to solve, and I really appreciate that. So I took a couple of notes really quickly just while Mr. Stuckey was presenting, and I think a lot of those things there, monopolizing, talking about conflict at trees, those are things that those of you who have been around the commission long enough realize that we dealt with on tree stands 15, 20 years ago now. People had a lot of tree stands out and we limited people to 2 tree stands. Unfortunately, there's always going to be a bit of conflict, I think, when we have such limited public land and so many people that want to access the outdoors. I have shown up before with a tree stand in place and found somebody in my tree stand. Guess what? Totally legal. I leave the tree stand out, somebody can hunt it. One occasion, a guy said, "Oh man, is this yours? I'll get down." Another time, the guy said, "Sorry, beat you here, my tree stand today." And I said, "Okay, don't love it, but here we are." So those sorts of things, I think, as we look at them, we've had those kind of conflicts continually, whether it's at the parking lot or at the tree. And I think those are jerk problems. Those are not camera problems. Those are not stand problems. Those are issues. There can be difficult to deal with. We do have hunter harassment statutes in place where if law enforcement determines that I, as a individual, am spying on, harassing, trying to ruin the hunting of another hunter, there are ways to deal with that. It's not very cut and dried. It's a little bit messy. But I don't think that getting rid of trail cameras is really gonna probably limit that very much. I have talked to some of the area managers, because I wanted to talk to them, like, am I out on a limb on this? Do you guys see big problems? They said, well, the problems that we saw was people like you, because I've done this, calling me and saying, ugh, I had a camera out, somebody stole it. Okay, well, is that a law enforcement problem? Is it not? Do I want my camera to get stolen? No, I don't. Did I have a lock on it? Probably not. Just threw it up on the tree and somebody saw an easy target and took it. So I don't doubt at all, as Deputy Secretary Schrag said at a previous meeting, well, since we banned cameras, we've seen a lot less stolen cameras. And so we have less Leo complaints. I mean, if we ban something and it's not there for somebody to steal, that's going to lead to less complaints. Sure. There was a question earlier about sort of the what do you lose? What do you gain? Commissioner, I don't think you were here the first time that I talked about this. I live sort of a little bit different life. I'm an old single guy that lives 8 miles from my wildlife area. So when I wasn't able to use cameras anymore, I went out 3 to 5 nights a week on the ag field. We're spotting, we're looking, we're doing the work. We're rustling a lot of ticks that belong to you guys and bringing them back to our house. But we're having a lot of disturbance on the wildlife area at that point as we're going in and out. The biggest thing that we lost is not about me knowing whether there's an 8-point there or a 10-point there. It's sort of a connection of enjoyment the entire year, right? I really enjoy deer hunting. I really enjoy deer hunting more when I'm engaged in it in April, when I'm engaged in it in June and July, showing cameras, showing pictures to kids. We have a lot of people that we've talked to on our wildlife area. We're near an urban area who don't hunt, but love the wildlife photography. They take pictures in their free time with a nice DSLR camera, but they run trail cameras on there because they put them on fox dens or groundhog dens, those kinds of things, and they're no longer able to do that. So I think it's a loss of enjoyment. As much as I enjoy deer hunting, I enjoy bird hunting 2 times as much, which is why I appeared in October from North Dakota to talk to you guys. If you told me, hey, we're going to still let you bird hunt, but you can't use your dogs anymore, I'm out, right? Those dogs are the connection. It's the fun part. I like watching them work. Checking a trail camera. And when I put out a trail camera, just so you know, I check it once a month. That's what I do. And I don't use cell phone cameras. I do have some concerns with those personally during season from an instantaneous. I think it's probably already covered under our 2-way communications regulation, but anyway, it's that connection to what it is that I'm doing and can I be excited? I am not the kind of deer hunter that if it's like, oh, rifle season is this 1 week and that's the only week we're doing it, I'd probably lose interest in it pretty quick. It's that sort of long-term connection. What keeps me going? What keeps me on the wildlife area? So I did want to talk about that a little bit. We talked a lot about the Midwest fish and wildlife and how this is a problem everywhere and we're hearing about it everywhere. And it is true that Missouri on Department of Conservation Lands bans trail cameras. But as we look at, and I don't know exactly what the Midwest group of Fish and Wildlife is made up of, but we're the only state in this entire area that has a statewide ban on publicly owned land. It's us, it is Delaware, it is Arizona, and it's Missouri on Division of Conservation Lands. That's it in the whole country. A lot of other states been mentioned. Alaska's been mentioned, Colorado's been mentioned, New Hampshire's been mentioned. Most of those states preclude cell phone cameras only during active big game seasons. So in Nevada, if I want to run a cell phone camera in the middle of the summer, as long as I don't put it on a desert water hole, I can do that. Same thing with Utah, same thing with Alaska. New Hampshire had a ban. They've come the other way. They got rid of their ban. What a lot of states are doing, because they have seen these, what I called jerk conflicts earlier, is they now require you to externally identify your camera with name, phone number, KDWP number, whatever that identifying information is, so that the law enforcement, if there's a complaint, knows exactly who to go to. And if that camera is not labeled, then it's confiscated. So I think there's a lot of intermediate steps that we could have taken, but I would have loved to have talked about if these regulations had been noticed up the way I wish they had been, that we could have taken some intermediate steps and not gotten to where we are today. I did provide the commissioner, and I don't know that today's the right day to talk about it, with sort of some thoughts, right? We can do nothing, leave it as is. We could do everything and make it go away, or we can find some intermediate steps. I do have some thoughts and ideas about that. I'm happy to talk about that whenever the time is appropriate. But I realize today that everybody's very busy and probably has heard enough of this for me today. So happy to answer any questions, happy to circle back with commissioners or staff and work through this a little bit more, but appreciate the opportunity today. Really appreciate Mr. Stuckey for presenting this and the findings from it. So thank you very much.
I appreciate your thoughts, Sean. I know you've given this a lot of thought and you've traveled to commission meetings to express your opinions. You've done a lot of work. You've shared some of those ideas with me that would be a camera protocol that would be less stringent than what we have today. And perhaps there are things to consider at some point in time as we continue to look what other states have done and what the will of the commission, the will of the secretary and the department is. So I will say I do appreciate the work you put in on this. Do other commissioners have comments or questions for Sean while he's at the microphone?
No, but I do have one last comment. Apologize. You know, the other kind of pet peeve that I have is people trying to decide who's a better hunter and how they hunt makes them somewhat better. You know, he mentions that he's single and he has time and he can go and he can set over fields and watch 6 nights a week. You know, my dad worked 2 jobs and of course there were no trail cameras when my dad was alive. My dad wouldn't have been able to go scout 6 days a week. My dad wouldn't have been able to go set in the field 6 days a week. We got a lot of blue collar people that are out there that aren't going to work in ties like all the rest of us. And they're not less hunters because they don't have time. And we got a lot of kids in high school and doing sports and they may get 1 day to hunt. And if we can help their enjoyment in a meaningful way, I just don't understand the concept of saying, well, you're not a good hunter if you're not out in the field or 7 days a week, or if you're using a trail camera or whatever. I think wildlife management ought to boil down to, are you doing something sound conservationally, or if it's a safety issue? And I'm talking about safety in the realm of hunting or for the wildlife, not to avoid conflicts of humans, because like he said, you got bad people that are going to fuss over, you know, anything. And that's, I mean, your points are extremely well thought through and taken. I'm receptive to your thought myself personally.
Other comments from the commission? Thank you, Sean.
Mr. Chairman, thanks, Secretary.
We have other people in the audience who want to speak to this subject. We've got Ryan in the hot seat. Okay, Ryan. Hey, thank you very much for your work. Appreciate it.
Chairman.
An issue that's come up to the commission a couple of times, and the secretary has given us an opportunity to have some more information on this night vision coyote hunting season. John Beckman is going to address us now.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, real quick, before John gets started here, but before you, what I've put together for the commission's consideration is a 50-state survey on this issue on night vision hunting of coyotes across the country. I just want to caution that I wouldn't treat this as gospel. There might be some errors in here, but I wanted to give the commission an idea of what the legal landscape is currently across several different states. So that's just for a general reference. If you have any more specific questions, please approach me and I can do a little bit more a deeper dive. But then attached to the back of this 50-state survey are the contacts that the commission and the agency has received, written contacts on this particular issue. We wanted to make sure that the commission had all of this information for the presentation today. That's what those items are.
Thank you very much, Curtis. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commission. My name is John Beckman. I am the new Wildlife Assistant Director of Research and Surveys for KDWP. Welcome to everyone. Before I get into talking about the night vision coyote hunting and predator control issues, I just wanted to give you a little brief background of myself so you know a little bit more about me and where I'm coming from. Looks like, Jason, I'll probably have to have you advance slides. So I'm a 6th-generation Kansan. Both sides of my family's homesteaded the farm ground. We still have the farm in the family. I did my undergraduate degree in wildlife biology and management at Kansas State University, and then did a secondary degree in natural resource and environmental science. After that, I moved west, and when I say west, I mean way west. I went out to the University of Nevada at Reno, which is land grant college in Nevada, to complete my PhD. My PhD dissertation research was on black bears. And in the last 25 years, I spent most of my career studying as a research ecologist, large carnivores and ungulates on the landscape. So I've worked on species and published on species ranging from black bears and grizzly bears to mountain lions and jaguars. I've also worked on medium-sized carnivores, including wolverines. I've worked on bobcats, coyotes, and several fox species. Myself and my graduate students, I've had several PhD and master's students. We've also worked on a lot of connectivity and long-distance migration issues around ungulates. And so I've studied pronghorn, mule deer, moose, elk, and mountain goats. 5 years ago, I was lucky enough to be able to come back home to Kansas. I took the Region 3 Wildlife Supervisor position for KDWP, and I've been in that position for the last 5 years until I took this position as of last week. So new to this position, I look forward to getting to know each of you and working with you on a lot of these issues in the coming months to years. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about the night vision coyote hunting and predator control issues today. I have three major focal points. First, I want to talk about some of just biological and ecological aspects of this issue. Then I'll talk about some of the social aspects and some of the things that we're hearing as KDWP staff. And then I'll just mention it. I won't really talk too much about the law enforcement aspects. I will turn that over to Colonel Greg Kaiser, who will cover some of the law enforcement aspects of these issues. But I just wanted to note up front that this is information dissemination only today. So let's talk a little bit about the biological background coyotes. As we all know, coyotes are a native species to Kansas. They are currently the largest carnivore that we have on the grasslands and prairies of Kansas, but that's not always been historically the case. We had black bears, we had grizzly bears, the Great Plains subspecies of wolves, and mountain lions historically in the state. But for the last 100+ years, coyotes have been the largest carnivore that we have on the landscape. Because of the absence of those large carnivores, coyotes have actually expanded their range, if you look into the eastern United States, into areas that they historically did not occur. And so I've had several friends that have published on this issue extensively, Dr. Matt Gompert, Dr. Justina Ray, looking at the expansion of coyotes in places like the Northeast US and along the eastern seaboard into areas that they didn't historically occur or at very much density. When you look at our coyote numbers and our data here in Kansas, what you'll see is this increasing trend, a slight increase in the population over time. Except I will point out in the last couple of years, we've seen a decrease in our estimates. We don't know yet if that's a real decrease or if that's just the typical noise and variation that you see in populations as they go through time. So that's something we're continuing to monitor. Of course, whenever you have an increasing population of carnivores on the landscape, then you have those segment of the public that talk about harvesting those individuals at a higher level. Next slide, please, Jason. And so I can tell you that one of the most challenging and charged issues in all wildlife management for my 30 years of working on large carnivores and medium-sized carnivores is when we start talking about harvesting predators, in this case, coyotes. And the question becomes, why is this so controversial? And I'll point out that I think of all places, this relatively recent article in ESPN got to this very succinctly where they said that it's a complex issue. And it really is a complex issue, and it's not an issue that's new to us here in Kansas. In fact, going through our records in the agency, the first time that I can see that we discussed predator control in order to increase prey populations was clear back in 1916. So it's something that we've been discussing for well over 100 years. So why is this so controversial and a challenge? Well, it really comes down to a lot of the complexities and the variance and the noise that we see in these ecological systems. They're very complex, and these simple explanations, simple models, and oftentimes simple solutions, they just are really rare. So looking for that kind of silver bullet approach and saying if we move this lever, then we're going to go from A to B, that just doesn't happen a lot of times in these natural systems. The other thing too is that predator control often is a very temporary, it's not a long-term solution to reduce either carnivore livestock predation conflicts or to increase prey populations whether those be ungulates or bird populations. And I'll try to explain that as we go today. And the reason really is that often we cannot undergo predator control and harvest levels at a consistent enough level or at a large enough spatial scale or over a long enough time scale to really have an impact. And the minute we stop some of these higher harvest levels, then predator populations can rebound relatively quickly. So why is this issue such a complex issue and controversial? Well, it really boils down to complex predator-prey dynamics. And I don't, at the risk of giving a biology or an ecology lesson here today, I do think this is really important that we understand this. And if you look at this graph on the right, this is just a prey population through time. So the blue line represents the growth of that population. And we can just say it's white-tailed deer for this. And so you're moving through time through the x-axis as you go along. And what you can see is in the lower left, when the prey population is at a low level, you get a fairly rapid increase in the population. It can grow very rapidly. But as the population approaches carrying capacity, which is denoted in this by the red line, then that growth rate slows down. And that carrying capacity is something that changes through time. So that red line can move up and down. And carrying capacity is just the number of individuals of a population that an area can hold. And so what really drives carrying capacity a lot of times is the productivity of the environment. So it's habitat quality, it's habitat quantity, and that can vary by the drivers. Things such as drought could lower our carrying capacity, or if we have a really good productivity year with a lot of moisture, then carrying capacity could increase. What we know about how predators interact with prey populations is when the prey population, in this case in our hypothetical white-tailed deer, when it's close to carrying capacity, the mortality that's caused by predators out there is what's called compensatory mortality. In other words, individuals that are being killed by the predators were most likely going to die from some other cause anyway because they're close to carrying capacity. And that idea has been worked out in the literature well over 80 years and some seminal papers by people like Arrington back in the 1940s. And we've continued to look at this for various predator-prey systems across the globe. Specifically, when you are at close to a carrying capacity, what happens is there's really not that much of an impact of predators. And so what the data show is that when you remove predators from those types of situations, you really don't see a big increase in the prey population. There's not much of a response. And this has been specifically shown for coyotes with predator control by a host of world-renowned coyote researchers, including Warren Ballard in a paper in 2001, Eric Giese, and some others have shown this concept. In contrast, and what makes this complex is if you have a population and the prey population that's at a small level, so it's a low level, then you can have a disproportionate impact of predators. And so in those cases, you can see some positive responses to doing predator control. And for the most part, when you look at the literature, and I'll point this out as we go here today, that tends to be for really small populations. So species like threatened and endangered species, you see a good response sometimes for increasing their populations when you do predator control in those situations. So the other thing that really drives a lot of this complexity is just the nature of these food pyramids. And the concepts I'm going to bring up here have been worked out by a world-renowned ecologist like John Terberg, who's published hundreds of papers on this very issue and including a book in 2015. And what he's shown and a lot of researchers have shown is that it really is that foundation of the house. It's the habitat quality and quantity that really drives prey population dynamics on the landscape and whether they're increasing or decreasing by these bottom-up forces. In contrast, the top-down forces that are exerted through predation by your large predators on landscape, while they're important in ecosystems, they generally don't have the weight and aren't the drivers that the bottom-up forces are from the habitat. And that's why in our agency, as Jeff mentioned earlier, we focus on habitat quality and quantity, and have even named our habitat program Habitat First for that reason. Next slide, Jason. So just to show that gets even more complex when we start talking about population dynamics, and I don't expect you to be able to read this or to decipher it. I'll walk you through it a little bit, but if this is an example from the literature for turkey populations, and what really drives turkey increase or decreases on the landscape is a whole host of factors. It can be things like weather, it can be disease, it can be individual animal health and body condition, it can be habitat quality and quantity. All these factors play a role. And what I've circled in red are the roles that predators play in this environment. And what you can see is they're an important component of the system, but they're just one component. And I think there's a tendency for us to, as humans, predators are very visual to us. We can see them, and it makes a lot of logical sense to say if we remove predators, we're going to get a corresponding response in the prey population. And because of all this complexity, that's not necessarily the case. So because of all these complexities, wildlife managers and wildlife biologists across the globe, so not just here in our agency, not just in the United States, but globally, they become very hesitant and they recommend caution and to proceed with recommending predator control as a method to increase prey populations or to decrease human carnivore conflict with livestock. And so they tend to recommend it only when it's absolutely necessary. And the reason for this, again, is because these results seem to suggest that it's mostly temporary. Predators populations can rebound very quickly. The minute you stop your control activities, the prey population doesn't really show a response, but then the predator population can respond very quickly. You can get new individuals. So if, for example, we remove a coyote from an established home range, a new coyote could move in into that vacated home range. And in some cases, you can even end up with new species or at new levels for those species as predators in the system. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And there's also behavioral changes of the predators, or in this case, coyotes themselves, that can really reduce the effectiveness. And this concept has been worked out in the literature, and this is not an exhaustive list of literature, but we've been looking at this for coyotes for almost 60 years now. And what they've demonstrated is when you harvest coyotes at a high level, the coyote behavior changes, their social structure changes. You get a younger age class out on the landscape, so you get more of these teenage individuals, I would call them, and so you have other conflicts that can arise. They get where your average age of first reproduction lowers, so you end up with even yearling coyotes producing pups. You end up with a larger litter size over time, and so you end up with the response that coyotes sometimes, when you harvest them, can end up with more of them on the landscape. So it's counterintuitive to what you would think when you harvest them at higher levels. Now, there's been a lot of recent reviews that have addressed the successes and limitations of predator removal for at least one component of human carnivore conflicts, and that around livestock predation. John Linnell is a world leading expert on this. He's worked in both Europe and here in North America. He's published a lot of papers showing the limitations and the successes of predator control, as have others. One of the most recent meta-analyses of this was by T.J. Clark and Mark Hebblewhite. And I know Mark very well, but in 2020, they published a paper, a meta-analysis, which is just an analysis where you look across a bunch of different studies. They looked at 52 predator removal experiments. And what they came to the conclusion is that very rarely did predator removal lead to corresponding increase in the prey population. The only time they saw it being effective was for threatened and endangered species. And really, again, the drivers were winter environmental conditions and the weather the year before. So those are the things that really drive prey populations, and that was shown repeatedly over those 52 studies. So there's other things that can make this a complex issue. You can lead to disruption of ecosystem processes when you remove the largest carnivore from the system, and you can have these unintended consequences. And I'll talk about my own work in the Great Basin in Nevada for 25 years. If you look at the Great Basin desert, historically it was a bear-dominated system. Because of conflicts, both real and perceived with livestock, bears were removed from that system. And the end result was mountain lions moved in for the first time in the history of that system. If you look at the paleontology of that records of that area and you look at historical records, mountain lions weren't present in the Great Basin Desert. But because of the removal of bears and some of the habitat changes, we end up with lions in there. And mountain lions now, there's 3,000 to 4,000 of them in Nevada, and they're the apex carnivore in that system. I'm not saying if we go and harvest coyotes at a higher level, we're going to end up with mountain lions, or we're going to end up with a loss of coyotes across the state or anything like that. What I am saying is that at local levels, if we reduce coyote populations, you could have some unintended consequences. Species like red fox could increase, for example, at a local scale. We know that red fox are predators on upland game birds, their nest, turkeys, waterfowl, all these species. So we just proceed with caution when we talk about this kind of stuff. Sorry, Jason. One other point I wanted to make is a seminal paper that I would consider really important was published by Mark Hurley and others in 2011, where they published a Journal of Wildlife monograph. A monograph is something larger than the typical peer-reviewed journal publication. It's actually like a small book, so it's a really good reference for a lot of different literature citations and stuff. But what they did in that monograph is, as the state of Idaho Fish and Game, they went out and they removed coyotes and mountain lions, as many as they could. They tried to do complete removals at various scales. So they did it at very local scales, all the way up to regional scales, where they were trying to remove every coyote and every mountain lion in multiple game management units. And the end result, what they found is that they didn't see any corresponding response in the ungulate prey population. Mule deer fawn survival didn't increase. The numbers didn't increase for elk, pronghorn, a host of ungulate species. And so they came to the conclusion that a lot of these reviews have, and their efforts by that state agency showed that they just really didn't see a corresponding response in the prey populations. And again, it was winter weather and the weather in the preceding year that was really driving habitat quality and quantity that then drove the prey population. There's also been a series of papers specifically on coyote removal that have shown no impact on turkey survival and recruitment. And so these papers go from the 1940s all the way to the 2000s. Okay, Jason. But, and this is my caveat, because this is a complex issue, in the literature, you can find examples where predator control can work. There's examples out there in the literature, and it tends to be, again, with smaller declining populations of species or at smaller spatial or temporal scales. So there is that body of literature that's out there that shows that it can be effective, but the weight of the evidence is kind of the other way. But I wanted to point out some of the recent examples that have shown that predator control has had positive responses. If you look at ungulates, so what I mean by that are deer, elk, pronghorn, Brock McMillan and others in 2023 showed that when you do coyote removal in areas immediately adjacent to mule deer fawning areas, they led to increased mule deer fawn survival. Smith et al. In 1986 showed similar results for pronghorn. For turkeys, Beeson in 1974 showed that coyote removal and predator control could increase turkey survival. And there's a host of papers specifically around pheasants and waterfowl for both coyotes, and some of it with waterfowl is around foxes as well, that show that predator control can be successful in increasing survival. So because of all these complexities, at KDWP, our focus tends to be on habitat management because the data are not compelling one way or the other really for predator control. The way the data suggests that it doesn't work. And so we focus on Habitat First, our Habitat First program, and habitat management because of the reasons that Jeff mentioned earlier. It's cost effective, we get multiple year benefits. And I just wanted to point out that as an agency, we're in the mainstream in that. The focus of most state wildlife management agencies is habitat. Same with federal agencies that deal with habitat and wildlife populations, and a lot of our NGO partners that are out there working to focus on habitat as well. So I want to make a couple other points I think is important to kind of, with our message of why habitat is so important specific to Kansas. If you look across the globe, grasslands are the most endangered ecosystem in the entire globe. It's not tropical rainforest, it's not other forest, it's not desert systems, it's not montane systems, it's not coastal areas, it's grasslands. If you look at the large grasslands across the globe, anywhere from 1% to 6% of them are remaining on the landscape. And so in Kansas, we're not only worried about our native grasslands, but even our enhanced grasslands and those under the CRP program. And if you look, the acreage in the CRP program in Kansas has declined by over half since its high. And so we're trending in the wrong way direction with our CRP acres out there. The other thing that's a stress on our grasslands has been worked out recently is basically this concept of a collapsing biome due to woody encroachment. Direct Twidwell at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln has published a lot on this. And you can see in these figures there on the right, the reds and the yellows show the tree encroachment between 1990 and 2020. Okay, that's a big change. And there's concerns about our grasslands in the state. And in Kansas, our upland game birds are grassland birds. And there's a lot of literature out there that shows an increase in trees can reduce not only use of areas, but survival of a lot of these species. So we think of turkeys as being animals that use the wood areas, and they do use wood lots. They roost in there, but they tend to nest in grassland areas. Greater prairie chicken, a very bird that's got the concern of us at KDWP and across the Great Plains, but it doesn't take much tree cover to reduce their survival and their use. We're talking like 1% to 4% of the landscape covered with trees, and you'll start to see abandonment by greater prairie chicken. And there's even a series of papers out there that demonstrate for deer production. There's a tendency to think one tree equals one deer, and that's the relationship, but it's actually that trees on the landscape and the grassland can actually cause predator traps for deer fawns and reduce deer fawn survival. And so as we get more trees on the landscape, we see lower densities, not only of upland game birds, but we see reduced use by a whole host of species. The last thing I want to mention on habitat and why we focus on it is some of the agricultural changes that I think that go unnoticed. And this, I can speak from experience on myself, my own family. If you look, when I was younger, there was a lot more wheat and milo on the landscape compared to today. We've lost a lot of millions of acres of wheat and milo, which are really important habitats for game birds, particularly pheasants. They create nests, they provide nesting and brood rearing cover. And we've seen an increase in soybean and corn and cotton on the landscape. And those are some of the changes that are also impacting some of our game animals out there as well. So hopefully that kind of summarizes some of the biological and ecological aspects of this. I want to talk a little bit about the social aspects around predator control and specifically night vision coyote hunting. And some of the things that we're hearing as KDWP staff from our constituents. One of the things that we're hearing is that night vision coyote hunting is competing with traditional coyote hunters. And what I mean by traditional, there are people that are out hunting during the day. They may be calling, they may be using greyhounds, but there's a concern that's being voiced by them of the allocation of the resource. And looking at our data, one of the concerns we have is that when you look at it, this is the most effective method for harvesting coyotes. In fact, it's twice as effective. The unit effort to take a coyote using night vision equipment is half of what it is for these kind of more traditional coyote hunting methods and other methods that take. The other thing that we're hearing is a concern from some of our constituents of devaluing coyotes as a species. Not only their role in the ecosystem and the important roles that they play, but the opportunities that they provide. For harvesting, from trapping and from hunting of coyotes I can tell you with having family in Western Kansas, is an important recreational activity for a lot of people out there. So we just want to make sure that we continue to value coyotes and don't see them as just a species that needs to be removed from the landscape. And then finally, I'm not going to cover this, but just raise the concerns and reports of abuse that we're hearing about night vision coyote hunting. I will leave that up to Colonel Kaiser and our law enforcement staff to talk about some of those issues. So what's next steps for us in the agency? One, we're going to continue to monitor the activity and the effects of this relatively new hunting season. We're in the 5th year. We're selling about 6,000 night vision permits a year. If you extrapolate the data from this current year that we're in, from January 16th of this year out to the end of this season, we will have about 7,100 to 7,200 permitted night vision coyote hunters out there on the landscape. We also have an ongoing statewide turkey research project that will inform our management. We are looking at all the limiting factors for turkeys in that project. And so predation and on nest and on hens and poults is being looked at. And that's a project ongoing with K-State and the co-op unit. We also have a quail project that will inform our management. We are looking with researchers from the University of Georgia that we are involved with, looking at habitat juxtaposition, its array, spatial array, and size patches and networks out on the landscape that will inform some of these limiting factors for quail out on the landscape as well. And just to give you a heads up, here in the next fiscal year, we will begin a new mule deer and pronghorn project where we will be looking specifically at some movement ecology, but part of that will be looking at recruitment and survival for both mule deer and pronghorn. So in conclusion, what I would say is that as an agency, the Department of Wildlife and Parks, we are looking at all options and opportunities at this point. I will note that this hunting season was controversial when we allowed it, so we were conservative at that time, but many of the concerns have not subsided and the issue remains controversial. Because of all these issues, the agency, we will be gathering additional public input through various avenues in the coming months, weeks and months. And so we continue to not only collect data from our research, but also to collect input from various members of the public. And I would conclude at this point, we're still maintaining status quo with no recommendations. And with that, I'll turn it over to law enforcement. Or you want me to stand for questions at this point?
Yeah, I think we had thought that maybe Colonel Kaiser could come speak and then we could move on to public comment. Is that okay with you, Chairman?
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Bear with me. I have to. I don't like using these, but Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thank you for having me today. My name is Greg Kaiser. I'm the Colonel for the Law Enforcement Division for Wildlife and Parks. I'll give you a brief overview of law enforcement's dealings with the thermal season that we've had going on. Since its inception, the thermal coyote season has gained significant popularity. With that popularity comes challenges for law enforcement. Compliance checks by officers take place throughout the year during a variety of seasons. The possibility of being checked by a game warden encourages many to stay within the legal boundaries of their outdoor activities. However, thermal hunters present a unique challenge. Every week during the thermal season, numerous tournaments are held across the state. While coyotes are the main focus, we've also noticed that some events promote prizes for the largest bobcats. This is concerning since hunting bobcats with thermal equipment is illegal, creating a potential avenue for unlawful hunting. We strive to reach out to these events to educate them on the laws. However, as privately organized gatherings, they can and sometimes do decline opportunity for wardens to address participants before they head out into the night. Once thermal hunters venture into the field, they become exceptionally hard for us to track down for compliance checks. And over the past few years, while wardens have made attempts to monitor events and inspect hunters in the field, our success has been limited. Recently, we have seen an increase in criminal activity involving thermal scopes, including instances of deer poaching last fall, involving multiple deer and multiple bobcat incidents within just the last couple of weeks. Although I can't delve into the specifics of these cases because they had not been adjudicated through the court system yet, they highlight that some hunters are indeed taking advantage of this advanced technology. For law enforcement, we rely heavily on the public to help us find cases and to solve cases. Typically, we've received calls reporting spotlights or gunshots during the night. However, with the emergence of thermal scopes and rifles equipped with suppressors, those calls have become less frequent. Enforcement challenges related to this technology is the reason that law enforcement has concerns with the current season or even expanding it. I'll stand for questions along with John. Mine was brief. No, sorry.
Thank you, both of you. I'm going to offer a couple of comments, and I know Commissioner Mark certainly has some comments. He's raised this commission level before. I would be interested in seeing kind of the last few years tracking of the permits. I can tell you as a commissioner, I've received calls on this, but also in talking to people about thermal hunting, there is an interest in this with the population, and more people I think are looking at it and wanting to do this. It has been approved by the commission as a form of hunting, and we have challenges getting new people interested in hunting. And so I think, being cautious in this area and getting the facts is helpful, so we can kind of see what the trends are and whether there is a need to perhaps look at the season, modify the season, move it away from deer season, even the antlerless deer or some things like that. I think the discussion is healthy and appropriate. And that's what I'll say about the subject at this point in time. Other commissioners have comments they'd like to make. Commissioner Mark?
Yes,
I'll turn it
please.
to
I
you.
appreciate the presentation. I felt the biologist presentation was pretty one-sided. Didn't cover both sides of the equation. I've got stacks and stacks and literally stacks of research papers, including a recent Texas survey that shows coyote harvest directly impacts fawn recruitment up to 74%. And they're not hard to find. I would recommend anyone get online and you can find them. And so I to make it sound as if I thought it was a little disingenuous, in my opinion. But let's start with the law enforcement side of the equation. Are there laws on the books right now that prevent shooting bobcats at night with night vision?
You could not shoot them with thermals.
And if someone were to, we have a thermal season now, and if someone were to shoot a bobcat during the current thermal season, would that be legal or illegal?
It's illegal.
Okay. Is spotlighting deer and shooting them at night with a spotlight legal or illegal?
It's illegal.
And I'm assuming that in your career, you've probably arrested a guy or two for that.
There's a lot of our individuals have, yes.
Right. So when we pass laws and regulations, we're doing our very best to protect something, people, wildlife, property, but there's always going to be the people that are going to break the law no matter what it is. You agree with that?
There's always going to be an element out there that, yes, that will violate the law.
I mean-
And there's also an element of individuals who are law abiding that will go out with every intention, but when they happen to see that trophy, they can't help themselves. And they
Well,
will go ahead and
they're not law abiding, sir.
well,
If you are tempted by fill in any blank, I don't care how good looking the girl is, Mrs. Mark will not approve. I mean, so to say that would be like saying, because there's some overweight people in the room, we're just not going to give them forks because they're going to be tempted to take an extra piece of pie. I don't think that's what we base our laws in America. Certainly couldn't imagine doing wildlife laws because we're going to ban some activity because there are some people out there that are going to break the law. I mean, do you think, is that?
Commissioner, I was
problem?
pointing out the concerns that the field wardens are seeing every year.
But would you promulgate laws based on what you just said, that because it may tempt someone to break the law, even though it is a lawful, possibly an effective conservation management tool that can be enjoyed by Kansans of all ages, But because there's some in our midst that might break the law, we're going to keep the law-abiding citizens from enjoying this lifestyle?
Commissioner, the commission itself will approve or disapprove of a regulation. We enforce it. And what I'm pointing out is that there are individuals, yes, they're out there, and I would love to tell you more stories about some of the recent cases, but since they're active investigations, I can't, and they have not been adjudicated with the courts.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are people out there using this technology to commit crimes.
Then they're criminals.
That's right.
And those people need to be punished, not law-abiding people that want to exercise our constitutional right in Kansas to hunt and fish and trap legally. And I shouldn't have my constitutional right to hunt, fish, and trap limited because we're afraid somebody else might break the law. Just like because when I drove here from Kansas City today, there were people that passed me on the road going well over 80. And I would hate the highway patrol to say, because there's people that are going to take advantage of our 80 or 75 mile an hour speed limit. We're just going to not allow people to drive. I mean, I understand your concerns and I think they're valid at some level, but I don't think that should take into any of the commissioners should take that into consideration when it comes to passing sound wildlife regulations. I do have a couple of other questions. In the studies that I read, and your predecessor actually came, I thought we have resolved at least part of the argument that you brought back up today, talking about how this might be detrimental to the coyotes. You agree or disagree that you would have to shoot in excess of 50% up to 74% of the coyote population to actually impact their recruitment?
Yeah, Commissioner, what I would say is that from the biological perspective, that would not at this point be a concern if like taking too many coyotes.
So so by increasing the amount of harvest of coyotes that we may take marginally with an increased night vision season, you do not see a negative impact on the coyote population?
Not at a statewide scale. I think there could be at local scales. And so it's an issue of scale, which is always important in ecology. I think you could have the potential where at a localized scale that you could reduce coyote populations where you might have some changes, but
Did
not
you
a
see anything that remotely came close to that with the limited coyote season night vision that we have now?
Not at this point with
So
the
you
way we
wouldn't
have
think
it.
that would be a viable concern, that we would see any significant detrimental impact on coyote populations if we expanded the night vision season?
Well, I think again, it depends on the area and what the distribution of that hunting is across the landscape. I think at a local scale, there could be some concerns, but at a statewide scale, no.
But I'm going to back up. Even on a local, I don't want to banter words with you, but I don't want to leave this as an open end that people walk away saying, maybe we don't have an answer to that. When we opened up night vision coyote season, is there any instance where you saw overhunting in one particular area that was detrimental to the coyote population in any specific localized region in Kansas?
We don't have those data now, so
Based on that data, that lack of data, you would not anticipate that happening on a statewide or a local level if we lengthen the season. Fair proposition?
fair proposition. I think the concern is that you can't look at the biological data in this issue in a vacuum. You need to consider all three components. And so that's why we're talking about the social aspects of this and the law enforcement aspects as well.
And that's what I'm just talking about the conservation aspect right now. I'm going to talk about one of them, and that's the population of the coyotes, because I want to make sure if the commission votes on this, that we're not doing anything that is going to adversely affect the coyote population. And if I understood your predecessor correctly, the way I've reviewed these, all of the data out there, there's no dispute in that you would have to kill even up to 74% of coyotes to adversely impact their population in any given year. And like you said, not even just 1 year, you'd have to hammer them like that every year. So you do not believe from a biological standpoint, increasing the season would negatively impact coyotes, and it would be something you could study on a harvest year by year. And if it was, we could modify it down the road. But the premise going in is you would not see any damage to the population.
All things being equal, yes.
Would hunting coyotes expanded night vision do anything that would prohibit you from doing what you're doing as a department from the habitat perspective that you said is the most important?
From the habitat perspective,
You
from,
said
from hunting,
habitat is the
right,
most
from,
important component of wildlife management when it comes to fawn recruitment. And I'm not saying I disagree with you. I actually agree with you. But my question is, there's nothing in extending the coyote season, the night vision coyote season, that would impair the department's ability to continue to try to improve habitat conditions to improve fawn recruitment.
that's correct.
So this would only be a supplement to what you believe to be the most important component of your tools in your toolbox, if I might.
What, clarify what would
If
be
we
the
were to
supplement?
extend the night vision coyote season, it would not have a negative impact on your ability to manage habitat in Kansas.
Right. Again, what I would say is I agree on that. From the biological perspective, the data are not compelling really either way. You can find those complexities and the difference in the literature both ways. So I think that this becomes at a large level, the social aspects and the law enforcement aspects for this particular issue.
Just focusing again on the conservation aspect of it. There's no impact negatively on the environment or the habitat. There's not going to be any negative impact on the coyote population itself. So from a sound science-based conservation perspective, as a biologist, you would have no objection to the expansion of night vision coyote season from the conservations of your three categories.
All things being equal, that would be the case. But if you increased harvest or something changed, then there could be biological concerns.
And that's with everything.
Right.
That's why you manage your populations
Right.
every year. You look at surveys, and just like we said, the biologist came in and said, we've got these eye worms. It doesn't seem to be overly concerning, but by golly, if we find more next year, we'll come back in and we'll do something more.
Right, the biological concern, all things staying equal, similar, harvest pressure per unit effort, all that kind of stuff wouldn't be the concern. Again, I think this is, I would use the analogy of a chair that's a three-legged chair. I don't know that I would want to sit on a chair that only has one leg on it in the biological,
We're
and
gonna
we've
get
got
to the other
that
three. I'm
social.
gonna give you a chance to get on your social soapbox here in just 2 seconds. But I want to knock the legs off the chair one at a time.
Okay.
And so from a conservation standpoint, we can agree, no negative impact.
All things being equal, there have been examples where, not necessarily with coyotes, but with other carnivores, that high levels of harvest have removed them from the landscape.
And from a law enforcement perspective, we have laws on the books right now that if somebody misuses we have the season now, so you're dealing with the same problems with evildoers, wrongdoers, criminals doing criminal things. There are sufficient laws on the books right now that if somebody breaks the laws, shoots an animal they shouldn't, does it where they're not supposed to be, does it during a time or season that they're not supposed to. There are laws in the books that you as a law enforcement officer can go after the evildoers and arrest them, correct?
That is correct, Commissioner. When I spoke earlier, we're trying to point out that this is a technology that for law enforcement is extremely challenging. There's no way for us to locate these people to even check them. Once they go out into the night, unless we just bump into them, it's not like going up on a flight and finding spotlighters with night vision goggles. There's nothing to defeat it, so to speak.
Well-
So it's hard for us to really gauge what you're trying to say, how many people are out there violating laws to catch them.
Right. Well,
So-
let's take bow hunting. Is there a legal shooting time to where you can actually shoot a deer with a bow in Kansas?
There's legal hours for pretty much everything.
Right. So if a guy's
Sure.
bow hunting in the middle of the woods and he releases that arrow 20 minutes before shooting time, how are you going to catch him?
Well, I see where you're going with this.
But the law's on the books, right? And so, and you have very few officers across the state. There's a lot of laws out there. Hunters, by and large, follow the rules. You agree with that? Hunters, the majority of the Kansas licensed hunters.
I would like to hope so.
Well, you don't arrest
But
most.
but we don't know.
Wow. So So you wouldn't agree with the general proposition that the majority of Kansas hunters are law abiding?
I would say the majority
And wanna
are
follow the
law
rules,
abiding.
and
Yes,
do follow the rules.
yes.
And report, and you get most of your tips from law abiding hunters that call you and say, hey, Frank just poached a deer, don't you? Isn't it mostly law abiding Kansans that turn in the other guys?
We get tips from everyone.
Right.
Commissioner.
But can we agree that hunters, by and large, are law abiding, probably the sole backbone of Kansas?
I would like to hope they are, yes.
And I would think under that proposition that we wouldn't restrict law-abiding Kansas hunters from exercising their constitutional right to hunt because there are a minority of people that are going to break the rules. Let me ask you this question. Does Kansas use USD shooters to kill coyotes?
No,
Your position is Kansas does not use USD shooters to kill coyotes in Kansas?
but I'm aware of.
Okay. I'd like someone to do a little research on that. Are you aware that USD shooters kill coyotes all over the country? You agree with that?
Yes, sir. I worked in Nevada and was aware of that
So
wildlife services.
USDA obviously is using a poor management tool in your opinion? We're wasting taxpayer dollars to shoot coyotes with government paid shooters. If it doesn't positively impact wildlife management, why would the government pay for USD shooters to kill them? That's an honest question. Why would the government pay USD shooters to kill coyotes as a management tool anywhere in the country if it didn't work? If managing coyotes wasn't effective, lethality of coyotes wasn't impactful.
Commissioner, I don't believe any of our officers are aware of USDA in Kansas
Well,
shooting
let's not say
coyotes.
Kansas, I'm
They-
asking the biologists.
Okay,
If they
I knew
do
they shoot feral hogs in
Yeah,
Kansas.
but if they shoot coyotes anywhere, USDA, I mean, would our biologists in Kansas say that it's a mismanagement tool? They're doing it poorly? Is that what we're saying from a Kansas biology standpoint?
I would like to remind everybody that this session is informational only.
But I want the best information to get out is my point, not just half of the,
This session is informational only.
okay?
As John indicated earlier, we're still receiving comments from the public. I've heard comments on both sides of this situation. We'll continue to evaluate it into the future. Can't speak about USDA tactics in other state. Our job is to manage the resources that we have here in Kansas. I think that nothing is being proposed at this point in time. That proposal will have to come from me. And so I think our biologists have done a good job of presenting the biological case from our perspective. We also have to consider the law enforcement implications. And we've heard from that as well. We will continue to have this discussion on into the future. And if we decide to go forward with the proposal, it'll come forward in the future.
Couple last points with all due respect. I don't know how we're going to get the issue squarely focused in front of all the people, the people out there, which is what I care about. If our biologist comes in an informational setting and only points out the parts of the studies that say there may not be any correlation. That's
I
problem.
think John did a really good job of pointing out both sides of the studies, both sides that the research represents. He also indicated that it depends on spatial scale. In other words, if you remove predators from a small geographical area, you can see impact on those prey populations. However, those same tactics don't necessarily play out when you're looking at it on a landscape scale.
So if I'm wrong about expanding, and you just actually, sir, made my point to the T, that if I'm wrong about expanding night vision coyote hunting, it's only because it's not going to have the impact on the deer population that I'm hoping for. That it may not be enough of a step to improve, even taking the biologist's word for it, that you literally have to hammer them regularly, these predators, if you're going to have a significant impact on their population to the point that it's going to impact fawn recruitment and deer retention in a positive way. So what we're proposing here, if we all heard the testimony correctly, that I'm proposing is to expand night vision. We've heard that there's absolutely no harm to the coyotes. There's absolutely no harm to their habitat management. We have laws in place to prevent evildoers and criminals from doing the bad things out there. So there is literally not one reason that this rule promulgation wouldn't go forward at this point. And we talked about the social aspect of this. I don't know what we're talking about the negative social aspect, because when the constitutional right to hunt in Kansas was on the ballot, I think it was the highest voter turnout in favor of any ballot initiative. And I think it was 86 or 87% of Kansas said we have a constitutional right to hunt and fish and trap in this state. And so if it's not going to negatively impact the wildlife, we have laws in place to stop people that are going to break the laws. We have a constitutional right to do it. We have a number of people that want to recreate this way. There is no reason that we don't push this forward. We don't need any more study. I haven't heard one thing here from a common sense standpoint that would require any additional study on this issue. We've heard that it doesn't impact negatively habitat or the population. And myself personally, I think it may be controversial in non-hunting circles, but they don't want us to hunt anyway. And so if we wake up thinking that, oh my gosh, I'm going to upset an anti-hunter, well, that's not how I'm going to operate, trying to take care of the population of wildlife and looking out after the hunters out there that want to do this. And if it's not for every hunter, don't do it. But it's certainly not going to be negative. And the next step may very well be that we don't hammer enough of these coyotes. And maybe we need to do something more, and maybe we come back next year with a bounty program or something. But I think if we do this in steps, and I would like to, I do a lot of national wild predator management issues. And I've presented in front of Congress multiple times on this issue. I actually have a bill coming out of Congress tomorrow on predator management on a national level. And I asked, and he's on here, he's a highly regarded biologist. His name is Nathan Roberts. And I met Nathan. I have no relationship with him whatsoever, but I saw him testify in Congress. And I would just love if you would give Nathan a couple minutes to maybe give another side of this equation. I've handed to all the commissioners, and I gave to the staff paper Nathan prepared on predator management that I'd like to put into the general record as well. Can we allow Nathan a couple minutes, Mr. Commissioner?
We do allow questions. I would either ask to be relatively brief, or we're going to give people a break here momentarily and we can come back to the subject as well. We've been at it for a couple of hours, and I know this is an issue of great interest to a lot of people. So if we end up with more comments than time, we might take a break. But with that, I defer to the secretary if you want to allow public comments, additional public comments at this point in time, or you want to take a break.
I think he'll be brief.
I'd say roll on then with Mr. Marks.
Mr. Roberts will be very brief.
And
I know we were in the midst of asking I don't know if any other commissioners had any questions at the time, but other than that, I know that typically, Chair, I'll defer to you on how you want to run your meeting.
why don't we transition to Commissioner Marks, a person, and then we'll go back to the commissioners since we're kind of in that vein of discussion.
Mr. Roberts, thanks for joining us and coming via Zoom. I know you're very busy.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Commissioner Marks. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I appreciate hearing a spirited debate on this issue. To me, that tells me that people are passionate about wildlife in Kansas, and I'm encouraged and happy to hear that. Um, I've talked with Commissioner Mark about coyotes a couple times, and I thought that maybe it'd be useful to hear from somebody that actually wrote one of those papers. So your biologist, John, presented some useful information, and I've been fortunate to publish many papers in my career, including papers on coyotes recently, and I thought I would just share just a little bit of that information. And I do understand and appreciate that I need to be brief. A little less than 2 years ago, myself and colleagues published a paper in the Journal of Wildlife, or excuse me, the Journal of Mammalogy, which is a highly regarded journal, with the title Survival and Cause-Specific Mortality of Coyotes in Wisconsin. And this is a paper that was a combination of both an empirical field study and then a meta-analysis like the biologist alluded to. And so I'll talk very briefly about that. In our study, we captured coyotes. We actually used some of the information from Kansas to capture those coyotes using BMP traps. And Kansas has really taken the lead, has been a primary state in developing trapping BMPs. And you can see how that's being appreciated across the country, the work that Kansas is doing. But we captured coyotes in southern Wisconsin. Working with trappers, we put radio collars on 74 animals, which is not an easy thing to do. But we did that, and we monitored them over time to figure out what their survivorship rates are. This is in an area that has a year-round hunting season, including the year-round night hunting season. And in short, what we found was we had a survivorship rate of 53%. So what that means is the coyote that's alive today has a 53% chance of being alive next year. And when I first saw that, I was a little surprised because to our best knowledge, that population was stable. So I was somewhat surprised to see that was a sustainable rate of take. But then as I got into the literature, like the biologist alluded to, it wasn't all that surprising. So in our paper, and I believe you might have a copy of this, Commissioner Mark, we also did a meta-analysis and looked at 22 different peer-reviewed studies. And what we found was that 53% mark was right in the middle. So there are some studies that show even higher rates of mortality, like you alluded to, Commissioner, and some that allude to a little bit less. But 22 studies demonstrating that coyotes can withstand a high rate of mortality. When we looked at what actually killed the coyotes in our study, it was primarily people. One way or another, they were either deliberately harvesting them or hitting them with vehicles, but 95% of our mortalities were human-caused mortality. And similarly, I thought that was alarming too, but until I started to look at the other data that's out there. And in our manuscript, we also did a meta-analysis on this, on cause-specific mortality, and looked at around 40 papers, and found that rate of human mortality is not unusual either and appears sustainable. So both of those things encourage me that coyotes can withstand a very high rate of mortality. I think it's also important to point out what a home range of a coyote is, and that varies depending where you're at, the 10 to 20 square miles. So when they're depleted on a small area, they replenish fairly quickly from surrounding areas. The issue of deer is a little bit more complicated. In our study, we also radio collared deer, and we found our top cause of fawn mortality was coyotes. But there's a difference between that and having a population level impact on deer. And as your biologist alluded to, that it really is an issue of scale. And there are several examples. One of the classic ones comes from Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and a very recent one comes from Georgia. So we have across the country represented there. But studies that do show or suggest some positive impact on deer populations with high levels of coyote control. But again, these are on small localized areas, which really shouldn't be surprising if you think about how difficult it is to decrease a coyote population on a landscape scale. There's just not going to be large studies like that because it's difficult to have any meaningful effect on a coyote population. So in short, in the spirit of being brief, some of the takeaway points that we had was that the predator prey issue is complicated. It's there seems to be some evidence at a small scale. The absence of evidence at a large scale may be because it's just difficult to do those sorts of things and to appreciably decline the population. And that coyote populations can withstand very high rates of human-caused mortality, and that high rates of human-caused mortality are unlikely to cause any significant long-term population impacts on coyotes. So I hope that's helpful. I know it's very brief. I did provide some papers, and I'm always happy to answer questions in this meeting or outside of this meeting as well.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. Closing comments, Commissioner Mark?
No, thank you very much, Mr. Roberts, Dr. Roberts. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're very busy and you're so well respected nationally. I wanted the folks here in Kansas to hear from you. Thank you.
And the document, thank you. The document that Commissioner Mark provided, coyote population dynamics, he's provided that to staff, and I believe they can make that a part of the minutes so it can be available to the public. Since it has been distributed to the commission, it is a public record. Mr. Secretary, I think we'll take a break now and then we'll come back and ask for comments from the commissioners and from the audience. So
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
10 minutes. We're going to be back at 2:15. We're ready to kick off the second half. Hopefully not the second quarter.
Gonna have to control things a little better.
It's fine. Yep.
Okay, in case you all remembered the topic we were on before we took a break, it was night vision coyote hunting. And now's the opportunity for our commissioners who have comments that they would like to make. I know Commissioner Lister, you had a comment, so I'll call on you first.
Mhm. Yeah, so I would just like to point out that we're a commission for every Kansan, not just the people in this room. I will always side on law enforcement. If somebody's telling me that from law enforcement that this is a problem, I'm gonna listen. We don't have the capacity as well as an agency. We don't have the funding to actually cover what we need to cover for conservation agents. So I would just be very cautious, and I would definitely support our conservation officers. Okay, second point. There's a huge difference between a non-hunter, an anti-hunter, and a hunter. And just like the research biologist was saying, this is a three-legged stool. You cannot just take one factor in. And once you start assuming things about people and calling non-hunters out for something that they may or may not believe, you're going to turn them off. So this is very much a social issue as much as it is a scientific issue. Okay. And on the scientific part of it, do you have a biology degree, sir?
I absolutely do not. That's why
Okay.
I brought a leading expert.
Yep.
And I didn't say non-hunters. I said anti-hunters. Big difference.
No, I think you said a non-hunter. So
Well, I did.
also,
I'm a big fan of non-hunters because about 80% of them support what we do. Anti-hunters, I give no thought.
So just keep in mind that when you do research, it's not a one side or the other. Okay. You've called the research that the biologists do in this room junk science, and I think that's highly disrespectful to them. It's highly disrespectful to me as somebody who does have biology degrees and soon to have a PhD. So I would just be very cautious about the words that you choose to use when you're talking about the people that work for wildlife and parks and the people that support wildlife.
Let me interrupt, Commissioner.
Junk science.
Let me
I
interrupt,
take offense to
Commissioner.
that.
I would appreciate if our comments, even from the commissioners or from the audience or from staff, are directed to the general population or to the public and not back and forth to each other. I think we need to focus on what our comments are and not enter into a debate between each other on these things.
So I would,
Thank
just-
you.
again, I'm gonna fall on the side of the law enforcement. If they're telling me law enforcement is an issue, I'm gonna fall on the side of our biologists. And I would just be very careful to not, and we need to consider social issues as well. So that's all I'm gonna say.
Thank you.
I feel
Commissioner Mark?
obligated. Yes, I feel obligated. I didn't use the word junk science. I said the research you brought was biased. Now, if you want to call it that, I'm not saying I disagree with you, but I think even Nathan Roberts said that there are some differing opinions. And what I was trying to do is point out that if we're going to get to the best decision from a conservation standpoint, that it behooves us to look at both sides from the conservation side critical. And that's all I said. I didn't say junk science. And I think even Mr. Roberts indicated that it's somewhat complex because there are the ability to do real large scale coyote surveys is difficult. And so what you see is smaller areas. Now you can extrapolate from science one way or the other. And I think the studies speak for themselves, but I didn't use the word junk science. And I love non-hunters because the majority of them support what we do. But I said, my comment specifically was, and if you misheard me or if there was a chance I misspoke, is that I do not believe anti-hunters should be telling us how to promulgate hunting regulations. That was my word, not non-hunters, because I have a lot of, in fact, the guy that's bringing my bill out of in the US Congress tomorrow, one of the biggest pro-hunting bills that's ever hit American soil is a non-hunter. So and I love him dearly. So it's not a non-hunter issue. It's an anti-hunter issue in my world.
Point taken. Any other commissioners have comments?
Yeah, I just say I appreciate the information we got today from the staff and also from the public, and hope we get some more. We do listen to the public, hopefully, and one of the things we have to consider is public comments. And this is, from the beginning, it's been a very controversial, very complex issue, as we've heard. I would say, in my personal experience, the comments I've received from hunters and landowners are probably 2/3 opposed to 1/3 in favor. That's something to consider. And then I would just say, as we move forward, if to consider whether to extend, we already have a night vision season. So if we're talking about extending it, I'd just like to be sure to, in addition to the information we're already receiving, make sure we have a clear understanding of what it is we're trying to accomplish with that.
Thank you. Commissioner Radel?
Yeah, I just hope the public understands with all these negative comments that we're not intending to eradicate coyotes, and that's kind of what the ecological comments we got were. It's just a new opportunity for hunters. It's so many people are out there investing a lot of money in this equipment, and they want to be able to enjoy it, and it's infinite renewable resource, it seems. We could keep hunting coyotes every day, and they're just going to be more move in for what everybody keeps telling us. So why not take advantage of that and give more opportunities to our people? In regards to law enforcement, I think it's just new that this thermal equipment's out there. It's getting cheaper. More people are going to have it. They're going to deal with it. You're going to have more people with it. You're going to have people breaking the law, but we have to find ways to deal with that otherwise. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Cross, you're the only one who hasn't spoken. Sometimes that's not a bad thing, I found, but
My dad used to say. No, you know, I feel like right now, I need more information. You know, if you look at the studies and the literature and everything that I've read, I mean, you can find a study that supports anything that you want it to support. We need to look at all the facets and the impacts on Kansans from the three-legged stool or even the fourth leg, in my opinion, that I need to hear from to make a good, solid, sound decision. So I'm looking for that information from staff. I'm looking for that information to make a better decision in the end. So that's where I'm currently at on this issue.
appreciate your comments. I think we all are. We do have an opportunity for the public. If there are people that want to make public comments on this particular issue, we're going to have general public comments later as well. Yes, sir. Please state your name and.
Rob Aiken.
Thank you.
I hunt coyotes with greyhounds. And I belong to social media pages that promote that. And throughout the state, the numbers have decreased dramatically since thermal hunting has started. Places where they would see 20 to 25, they're seeing 3 or 4 now. It's all over the state. As far as deer population in my part of the state, we need more coyote. If he's saying they're killing fawns, we got way too many deer. When you see 100 deer to 1 coyote, there's too many deer. A friend of mine texted me on the way up here. He's from Anderson County. He's been hunting since 1969 with dogs, and he found 3 coyotes shot on his neighbors. He was able to track it down. The guy shot him at night using a thermal with a silencer. Did not have permission. There was a German Shepherd shot 200 feet from a neighbor's house. I'm assuming that they thought it was a coyote. There's also been border collies shot in this state by night hunters. Now you say there's 7,100 licensed night hunters. I'm sure there's more than that. That's just how many that signed up. And your game warden has come out and said that he cannot control it because they're using thermal, so there's no spotlight, and they're using silencers. They can't catch them. There's no way they can catch them. This guy also texted me that they found 3 dead deer with their heads cut off. That tells you right there that they're also poaching. You know, seems like everything that this commission's done, and since I started hunting back in the mid-70s, 50 years ago, has not been good. When I was a kid, we hunted with greyhounds and trail hounds, and I lived south of Overland Park, about the same distance you do from Kansas City. And we built a new lake. They thought there was too many coyotes, so all of a sudden we started getting mangy coyotes. The rumor was they was turned loose to control the population. Just like your guys are wanting to control the population with night hunting. It knocked the coyotes out for 15 to 20 years. I mean, there's a few around, but there's nothing like finding a dead coyote in your hay barn froze to death with no hair. And they're still mangy coyotes to this day. Next thing, we had quail and pheasants throughout the state. We turned turkeys loose throughout the state. They overpopulated, nobody hunted them. The quail population gone. We're now getting a few back, but not like we was. Pheasants, for the last 10 years where I go, of course, I see where there was 4 of them that was positive for the eyeworm. We've been turning them loose for 8 or 9 years now, trying to get the population back. You know, I mean, it's just, seems like everything you do. In my hometown, a lady videoed a wolf in her backyard. She lives in a subdivision. She turned it in to Fish and Game. One of them said, "Oh, it's a coyote." No, she grew up in Oakley. She knows what a coyote is. And she also shoots them. And so she just hung up from that one. And the next personnel called her almost immediately, said, "Oh no, it's a wolf where you live." So the rumor is you guys have turned wolves loose. I heard the biologists say, well, they're native to here, and didn't really say whether or not they're back, you know, to help predator control. But yeah, I've seen, that's the 3rd one I know in Kansas that I know of, wolves. Mountain lions are back. Game cameras have done that. You know, the issue right now, they're hunting, allowing this thermal to do it during mating season. That's where you're going to kill the most of them because they're dumb. You know, that's the best time. It's kind of like killing deer. You can kill a big buck during rut because they're stupid. And I don't know why the deer population is down because of the nature. It's not because coyotes is killing 19 to 34 fawns every year. It's because of nature. And also in western Kansas, mule deer is down because whitetails have moved in and taken over. You know what happens when a mule deer gets bred by a whitetail buck? They can't, it's sterile. You know what? Open up the whitetail buck tags in western Kansas and shut down on the mule deer. You can get the numbers back. Simple as that. I know you guys are pushing for out-of-staters, you know, not only deer, but for turkey and for this coyote hunting deal for a moneymaker. But you guys had a moneymaker back 40 years ago with quail and pheasant. They ain't hardly any hotels and motels and restaurants open in western Kansas now because nobody comes here. They go to South Dakota. And there's not hardly any quail. Yes, habitat's the biggest part. Farming practices. We all know that used to be the dividing fence property line would have 10 foot on each side of weeds. It's not there. There's 4 hedge posts down through there. So I'm against it. And I think, you know, people that make money off of deer hunting should abstain from voting on things because it looks like they're pushing it for financial reasons. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Aiken. Is there anyone else who would like to comment on the night vision piece we're talking about now?
We do have some online, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jason. Please identify, oh, Zach Pastora. Thank you. Please identify yourself, Zach.
Oh, let me unmute you, Zach.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Commission. My name is Zach Pastora. I'm the new director and state lobbyist for the Kansas chapter of Sierra Club. We're a organization with about 5,000 members and 18,000 supporters that are geared toward enjoying, exploring, and protecting the wild places of the earth and promoting the responsible use of the Earth's ecosystems and resources. And I'm calling in today. Sorry I couldn't make it with you. I'm calling in from just outside of Tonganoxie. So I hope any commissioner from Basehor doesn't hold that against me. We're chiming in to remind you, and we've offered our position in 2021 when first considering nighttime hunting of coyotes, is that we generally oppose enhanced technology and nighttime vision, thermal imaging equipment and artificial lights for the recreational hunting of coyotes. And our members are both hunters and non-hunters. And our concerns basically come down to a couple of issues unique to nighttime hunting as it concerns sound wildlife management strategies and the science and that of public safety. I think it was mentioned by the commissioners, and just as a reminder, is that we hope you balance the broader public interest in your mission to protect the ecology and wildlife of the state to those who are hunters and those who enjoy wildlife, just watching it, campers, hikers, equestrians, and those who just otherwise use the public or private land. We're concerned about sporting chance and fair chase as it concerns nighttime hunting. You all probably know that the North American model for wildlife conservation generally views wildlife should be killed for legitimate purposes and define sportsmen as those who allow for a sporting chance of fair chase and will not otherwise waste the game that is killed. And it's our curiosity of this nighttime hunting is those that are using killing coyotes at night are actually harvesting the animal. We're also concerned about some of the science that was offered earlier by Dr. Beckman that was saying that over harvesting of or over killing of coyotes can disrupt the social structures. And we've seen science has said that it can, create a unintended consequence for increasing populations if your intent is to protect your animals, for example. So it's not conclusive that scientific studies show that the allowing extra hunting of coyotes will help the reduce predation on livestock or wildlife. So for what that's worth. And then also we also our members have concerns about the public safety. I know on a personal note, as a rural resident, I always get a little concerned about gunshots heard at night. But our members concerned that nighttime hunting, especially when we have other opportunities for conservation, wildlife management strategies, that hunting at night may pose an increased public safety risk. So those are just a few of our comments. We're happy to submit a position in writing, but we just urge you to consider reconsider maybe the nighttime hunting at large if you're seeing increased problems with it when other hunting strategies for coyotes are acceptable or preferred. We do have a position that hunting is acceptable management strategy, but we do encourage that any regulations and privileges there are be balanced by scientifically appropriate management strategies. So thank you for the opportunity of public comment, and again, thank you for your service. Appreciate hearing about this through enhanced distribution of the opportunity to involve the public comment. I heard about this on the evening news. So with those comments, we urge you to not expand the nighttime hunting season in Kansas at this time for coyotes. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Zach. It looks like maybe we have a few more people. Jason? I see
Yes.
some hands up.
Jessica Neville, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. So yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for letting me speak. My name is Jessica. I'm from Wichita, Kansas. I just wanted to address the committee, obviously regarding this night hunting issue with coyotes. Here's kind of where my interest comes from this. Following an incident last year in Wyoming involving the cruelty and torture of a young wolf, I made the effort to become more familiar with our regulations here in Kansas. I'm going to guess that maybe a lot of you are familiar with this event, but I'll summarize. A man chased a wolf with his snowmobile to the point of exhaustion. He struck and injured the wolf, leaving her immobilized, no longer able to run. So then he gathered her up, duct taped her mouth closed, and took her to a local bar during operating hours. Photos and videos circulated and clearly captured this man and patrons taking pleasure in the presence of this incapacitated, gravely injured wolf. She can be seen in the video laying on the floor of suffering and agony. We're not really sure how long. Her muzzle was still bound. They had put a shock collar on her neck. Sometime that night, this guy took her out to the parking lot in front of the bar and killed her. The incident was reported to their local law enforcement and game agencies. He was given a $250 fine, and that was it, nothing more. It's worth noting that the manner in which he pursued and immobilized this wolf is legal and widely practiced. It's commonly referred to as yoke whacking or wolf whacking. There is currently legislation introduced in the U.S. Congress to ban this practice. Aside from the obvious cruelty of this act, it is complete absence of any regulations that would have criminalized what he did. It is in this inadequacy that motivated me to become more familiar with our Kansas regulations. I realized that Wyoming is far away, and since we don't have wolves here in Kansas, they seem unimportant or irrelevant.
No, 362, but for 2 years.
Sorry about that, Jessica.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, I realize that this might seem irrelevant here in Kansas, but for many of us, we now realize that we cannot rely solely on those who craft the regulations to ensure that heinous acts like these are clearly defined as being far outside of ethical hunting practices. Unfortunately, this sort of behavior is far more prevalent than many of us may realize. In June, I emailed Mr. Matt Peaks, the biologist with the Kansas game, and I asked him for clarification on several items in our current regulations. I do regret that I didn't ask more specifically about night hunting and thermal imaging. I guess that's because I felt the regulation was pretty clear. Additionally, one specific question I did ask is the classification of coyotes. Are they predators? His answer was no, there is no formal classification of predators in our state. I am not a hunter. I am not anti-hunter. I am just a non-hunter. I have no interest in hunting. However, I do very much appreciate all the spaces of nature in Kansas and the wildlife among them. While the interest and concern for our wildlife practices may originate from very different positions, the value in all perspectives must be considered when building and amending regulations. I do wonder what change has occurred in the presence of coyotes that warrants this proposed change in our regulations. As they stand, they seem to allow liberal and ample methods of the take of coyotes. As I said, I don't hunt, but I do know that most that do value the integrity held in upholding ethical hunting practices, such as fair chase and expeditious kill. Truly, I see nothing fair or ethical in using such advanced practices to stalk and kill any animal. As an activist participant in wildlife advocating, it is quite disheartening and frankly discouraging to watch as our wildlife continues to be threatened by such aggressive and unnecessary hunting practices, most often resulting in a Trojan horse named wildlife or predator management. At times, it is exhausting and difficult to keep up, but rest assured, any efforts to be given a seat at the table will in no way be diminished. Please understand that for most of us, regardless of personal opinion, there is no general will to impede upon the practice of ethical hunting. The incident in Wyoming has garnered widespread, well-needed, and deserved attention. Intense scrutiny remains as advocates and everyday citizens continue to be engaged and monitor forthcoming attempts to amend policy regarding wildlife. More threats lie ahead, placing more wildlife in peril. I believe I speak for all wildlife advocates when I say, to be certain, our commitment to protecting and advocating for wildlife is unwavering. So my ask is simple. Please do not implement this proposal. Please recognize that those of us who value our wildlife insist that our interests hold equal weight in developing regulations regarding the presence, management, and treatment of wildlife in our state. Please consider the value in wildlife that exists outside the realm of hunting. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Jessica. Jason?
Okay, Mr. Cromar, Tad Cromar, I'm going to unmute you.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you and see you.
Great, great. Thank you. I am Tad Cromar from Western Douglas County. And I think there are better ways to reduce coyote predation of livestock than massive slaughter using enhanced technology such as night vision. Some methods could include guard dogs, donkeys, llamas, and better fencing. A lot of different ways to do that. Also, it's been suggested, there's at least some evidence that this would not ultimately reduce the coyote population. So that, therefore, it may be totally ineffective in reducing predation and therefore totally unnecessary. And also someone who lives in a rural area, I certainly don't, I'm not thrilled with the idea of hearing gunshots at night from this night hunting. I would much prefer not to have that. And I think that the public safety and the well-being of the public should be taken into consideration in this matter. So I hope that you do not extend this night vision season at all. I would really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Cromar.
Okay, Walker Trimble, I'm going to unmute you.
Hello, Commission. My name is Walker Trimble. I'm from Burlington, Kansas, and thanks for allowing me to speak today. I apologize I'm not there in person. You don't want me there in person, and I don't know that I had the energy to go all the way there today. I come before you today to share my experience with night vision coyote hunting. I am a competitive night vision coyote hunter. I compete regularly in 24-hour tournaments where both night vision and daylight tactics are used. I have been coyote hunting for nearly 20 years, and I have harvested thousands of coyotes in my hunting career. I'm here to share my experience and observations with you. My family owns over 600 acres of farmland in Kansas, which we also use for deer, turkey, and quail hunting. I can speak empirically about the effect coyote management has had on those species populations on our land. Kansas coyotes typically mate around mid-February to mid-March with an average litter of 4 to 7, but as many as 14. Kansas was one of the last Midwest states to implement recreational night hunting for coyotes. According to a KDWP report dated in 2001, KDWP states that in talks with law enforcement and state fur bearer biologists, there has been no increase in illegal activities with night vision more than any other hunting types. To further quote KDWP, it didn't document any major issues indicating the season was problematic. Also, according to the night vision survey from 2001, it states night vision equipment aided in the harvest of less than 19,000 coyotes. Total hunting harvest was greater than 100,000 coyotes, and trappers harvested 34,275 per the estimates. I would like to ask the commission to please extend the thermal night vision season in Kansas to encompass the entire year, minus those days that are any part of any deer rifle season. The 90-day night vision season we currently have is simply not enough to make a serious dent in the coyote populations in Kansas. I have 3 specific facts to share with you. The first one is hunting coyotes with night vision is far more effective than hunting during daylight hours. Excuse me. In a typical 3-hour period hunting in daylight, I harvest an average of 3 coyotes. Although in a typical 3-hour period at night, I harvest an average of 4 to 5. Coyotes are far more wary during daylight hours compared to nighttime, when coyotes are far more likely to come into the call. If Kansas is serious about bringing bringing coyote populations down, we must lengthen the night vision season. If we want to seriously protect deer by improving fawn survival, we must allow coyote hunting in May and June. As all of you know, that is when the fawns are born. Coyotes prey on the fawns and kill them in massive numbers right after they are born. Night vision hunting before and during the fawn period is crucial protecting these fawns. If you only night vision hunt January, February, and March, many coyotes will move back into the area by the time the fawns are being born. Third, based on the empirical observations we have made on my family's farmland, I can say for certain that aggressive night vision coyote hunting has made a major impact in improving deer, turkey, and quail numbers. Once Kansas introduced night vision hunting 5 years ago, I immediately used it to increase the coyote kills on our land. Since then, the quail have doubled, if not tripled. Our turkey population has increased significantly, while the turkey populations have been on the decline elsewhere in Kansas, and the deer population is at the best it's been. I am confident that expanding the night vision season will allow my family to see even more greater improvements in desired wildlife populations. I and the rest of the outdoorsmen and women thank you for making the move to night vision nearly 3 years ago now. We have patiently waited for the 3-year review as we were told would be coming. You have all the information you need. Please act now to protect the deer, fawns, turkeys, pheasant, and quail populations in Kansas. There is no excuse to delay further. The one thing that I do want to talk a little bit about is earlier, Colonel Kaiser mentioned the issue about bobcats in these tournaments. And the tournaments that I'm been involved with, we have to send in video evidence, and that really alleviates any sort of bobcat harvest coming after dark. For those bobcat harvests to qualify in the tournaments, you have to take a video, and a lot of times you have to do an eye shine test to show that it's a fresh harvest. You have to shake the animal to show there's no rigor mortis or anything is set in, so that all that, and then obviously the video has to be during daytime. So that is one simple way that we do mitigate the risk of bobcats being harvested at nights in our tournaments. And then lastly, before I leave, the biologist from the state that had the report that showed that the coyote numbers were down, and he made a comment, and I agree with him. I think that certain areas of coyotes are down. I've got some landowners that I hunt on that have told me they're seeing more squirrels and rabbits than they ever have. And there's not a calf loss like they've had before. But I believe that there's other areas I get calls from landowners. This is the easiest time for a guy like me to get permission is calving season. You get all the permission you want during calving season because the farmers and ranchers are losing money quickly because of these predators. So if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Trimble.
Thank you.
We have one more, Jason, maybe?
Looks like one more. Elena Tillman. I'm going to unmute you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Elena Tillman. I am respectfully requesting better governance than going backwards, in my opinion, fair chase hunting principles. My family does hunt. I am a non-hunter, but I come from a long line. I believe that night vision goggles or any other night vision equipment, thermal imaging equipment to hunt coyotes year-round violates every fair chase guideline that I've been taught. Not only that, but hunting at night leads to, as others have said, leads to greater risk for mishaps, false confidence, and overall pokes major holes in public safety. It's nearly impossible to enforce poachers during the day, but all the more impossible at night, as was also stated by the LEO. It can become a slippery slope. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. This proposal makes it way too easy to poach. We see that in other states. On a personal level, gunshots at night with my northern breed dog scares me. But the possibility for silencers illegally entering the equation scares me even more. Further, it completely negates ecological principles. Coyotes already have next to no protections here. They can be killed indiscriminately anytime, by any means, regardless of social ecological role, age, breeding pair status, pregnancy, thought to orphaning pups, size, contribution to genetic diversity of the population, or ability to manage the rodent and tick population for its unique role in the larger ecosystem. And I know lots of people like that advantage of the rodent and tick population control. This can lead to second and third order negative and often unforeseeable consequences. treating them as mere numbers and vermin when they when that's when they're just numbers, it's oversimplifying a complicated issue. Lastly, wildlife management, in my opinion, should be fair, science-based, and democratic, not dictated by special interests, but rather by ecological and biological science, and most importantly, ethical hunting practices. Contrary to earlier statements, hunting with night vision is not a constitutional right, and there are reasons for that the general public do not have access to the same tools as USDA. We, the people, also recognize the public trust that we, the people, deploy per the public trust doctrine. So on behalf of ethical hunters everywhere, I support a balanced approach put forth by the true subject matter experts in the room today, and I urge you to table this proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time today, Elena. I would note for the record, we do not have a proposal in front of us. This is a subject matter discussion, and we appreciate the comments that we have had today.
Chairman, I got one more that chatted directly towards me. He had an issue with his hand raised.
Very, very good, Jason.
I'm gonna unmute you, Justin.
Yes, my name is Justin Linscheiden. I live in Newton, Kansas. I hunt around a lot of cattle farms. A lot of farmers have contacted me about hunting at night, and I invested the money into thermal. And it's a great tool and an opportunity to help with the coyote population during the proper times. And I definitely see the concerns for people breaking the law, but law-abiding citizens like myself are not ones that are going to be out breaking the law. And I highly doubt that many people that are putting forth the effort to spend money on tags or permits to night hunt are really willing to risk losing a $6,000 scope or a $2,000 rifle or a $30,000 or $40,000 truck. And not to mention the fines and your livelihood if you were to go to jail. I think there is definitely a time and place for the night hunting, and I definitely agree that it should not be during the big game seasons at all. But law-abiding citizens are going to follow the rules, and rule breakers or criminals are going to be criminals. Activity comes with the people you surround yourself with. And I definitely think that it is going to be a helpful tool if it's passed to be a year-round situation. And I definitely look forward to it to being a year-round situation. I was stationed at Texas, and it was an all-year-round opportunity there to use thermal and night vision equipment and lights to harvest coyotes and hogs, among other critters. And I don't believe that they see the problems like we see with coyotes down there like we are here. So with that being said, I am definitely in favor of the all year round season, and I hope that it comes to a vote. And that's all I got to say.
Thank you, Justin. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Jason, you go through them?
That is all I'm seeing at this point.
All right. You in the audience might be happy to know we are now on page 2 of the agenda. We are at point of general discussion on the 2025-2026 waterfowl season dates, bag and possession limit.
Sorry, because we moved the permit draws to the end, the commissioner draws, we still need to cover that.
I've got it written down here if you're ready to expedite that to this point now. I see Deputy Secretary Schrog is eager to come up here and conduct the drawing.
Sorry, we have to move back to the first page.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I apologize for the shuffle in the agenda. The valuable ping pong balls, the essential ping pong balls had a little issue in transit, so they made it. quick background on these Commissioner big game permits. KSA 32970 allows the commission to issue up to 7 of these big game permits annually to raise money for conservation. In those permits, we have 1 elk permit, 1 antelope, or up to 7 any deer permits that may be issued through this lottery draw to qualifying conservation organizations. The first permits were awarded in January of 2006 when 7 conservation organization applicants drew 1 elk and 6 deer permits. Only nonprofit conservation organizations and local chapters based or operated in Kansas that actively promote wildlife conservation and in the hunting and fishing heritage are eligible. An organization or chapter can receive a permit only once in a 3-year period. Winning organizations can then sell the permits to the highest bidders. Once sold, the cost of these permits is subtracted and 85% of the proceeds are sent to the department along with a conservation project proposal. The organization retains 15% to spend at its discretion. Once the proposals are reviewed and approved, the money is sent back to the winning organization to complete the project. And you can see in your briefing book kind of the history of the total number of applicants and the funds raised from year 2006 through 2024, and pretty substantial increases as we've moved along. And the total applicants kind of varies. It just depends. For 2025, we had a total of 134 total applicants. Last year, the 7 permits sold for a new record average of $52,571. The previous record was set the previous year with an average of $45,857, with 3 of the permits selling for a new record of $56,666 each. The highest price ever bid on an elk permit was $23,000 in year 2006. Antelope permits have only been awarded in 2 drawings, and both were traded for a deer permit. Organizations have spent the money on projects such as Bring Back the Bottoms, and of course Cheyenne Bottoms, the Pheasant Initiative, youth sport shooting programs, and youth special hunt programs. So with that, each one of you commissioners will draw one of the infamous ping pong balls. They almost looked like golf balls for a minute. That would have been a little more difficult. Since Commissioner Carpenter is not present, I will have Mr. Chairman draw 2. So I'll start with you and end with you. Once you draw the number, announce the number, and Megan will record it.
Yeah, the dollars are very substantial. $367,998 raised last year.
And a lot of natural resource agencies have this similar type setup, and it does bring in some conservation dollars where state budgets have limitations too. So this is an avenue where we can get more conservation on the ground.
Very good.
Start there and backward. Okay. All right, I'll be one.
I never win, but somebody else will this time. Big and deep. Number 78.
78 is Ducks Unlimited Wyandotte chapter.
$19.
19 is Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Kansas chapter.
$87, it looks like.
87 is Kansas Bow Hunters Association.
$69.
69 is Ducks Unlimited, Kansas University chapter.
$97.
97 is Pheasants Forever, Southwest Kansas Ringnecks.
$49.
49 is Pheasants Forever, Osborne County.
Last one for Commissioner Carpenter.
Here you go, Commissioner. $33.
33 is NWTF Salty Spurs chapter in Hutchinson.
National Wild Turkey.
I think we're good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary. Very worthwhile endeavor for us. Okay, now back to page 2. Unless you object, Curtis.
No objections. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, general discussion. 2025-26 waterfowl season dates, bag and possession limits. We've got Tom Bedrowski.
Thank you, Chair,
Tom?
Commissioners, members of the viewing and visiting public. Do have 2 items for your commission's consideration today. First being the annual development of season dates and bag limits. The second item is the 5-year review of duck zone boundaries. Each item has a different timelines and commission actions. We'll start with the annual waterfowl regulation cycle pertaining to the development of the 2025-26 waterfowl seasons. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, with input from the Flyway Councils, annually develops frameworks within states to establish their state-specific migratory game bird hunting seasons. These frameworks establish the maximum bag and possession limits, season lengths, and the earliest and latest closing dates. States must operate within these frameworks when establishing their migratory game bird seasons. A briefing item was prepared in the commission packet regarding the development of the 25-26 waterfowl seasons. Included are the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service season frameworks and other pertinent background materials, including waterfowl populations, harvest, and hunter activity, as well as historical season dates. There are 2 changes in the 2025-26 frameworks from the previous year. The first change is the reduction in the number of days available for September seasons being reduced from 16 to 9 hunting days. This reduction is a result of the 2024 blue-winged teal breeding population index of 4.6 million, which is below the 4.7 million threshold for a 16-day season. The second change is the increase of the daily bag length of northern pintails to 1 to 3 pintails per day. This increase is a result of an interim harvest strategy developed by the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Flyway Councils. This strategy aims to ensure long-term health and sustainability of pintail populations, gain greater understanding how different harvest rates influence pintail populations, and to provide additional harvest opportunities when the population can't sustain it. As we are in the initial stage of the scoping process, staff recommendations will be presented at the March Commission meeting. With that, I would like to thank you for your time and attention and be glad to stand for any questions.
Questions from the commission? Questions from the audience? Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And for the second item on duck zone boundaries, I do have a short presentation regarding those.
Very good.
While waterfowl seasons, dates, and bag limits are set annually, duck hunting zone boundaries are set on a 5-year basis. Today will be a quick overview of hunting zone boundaries in Kansas. As we work through the regulatory process, we'll be giving more detailed presentations regarding decision factors, staff recommendations, and greater discussion on the future of Kansas's duck hunting zones at upcoming meetings. Begin with a few basics. Zoning is the establishment of independent seasons in 2 or more areas within a state for the purpose of providing equitable distribution of harvest opportunities. Zoning and season splits enhance the state's ability to match season dates with available habitat types, migration chronology, and season preference of duck hunters for specific areas. Zones and splits are critical for physiographical diverse states like Kansas that have an added difficulty in selecting season dates that accommodate not only a variety of hunted species, but also a variety of hunting styles and preferences. Being a mid-latitude state, Kansas also has a vast span of migratory and wintering periods. In Kansas, migratory game periods begin in late August, early September with blue-winged teal, and that continues with different species progressing through December. Kansas also serves as a wintering terminus for a variety of water, particularly for a variety of goose species as well as mallards. Kansas waterfowl hunters are also just as diverse as their waterfowl species. KWP typically receives strong comments, often conflicting in opinions about when seasons should be held. Some hunters may prefer early season dates while others preferring the later. Zones and splits are one tools to help serve this broad constituency base. Zoning effectively increases opportunities for hunters willing to travel among zones. These benefits of zonings and splits are increases as we move to restricted season lengths as it were in place in the 1988 through 1992 seasons, where seasons were limited up to 39 days. And one more, please. In the 120 plus years of regulated waterfowl hunting in Kansas, there have been 4 major periods to duck zoning. There has been some smaller changes as well as season lengths and bag limits have occurred during these periods. But in general, prior to 1972, we had one statewide season. From 1972 to 1995, the state was divided along Highway 283, giving us the High Plains and Low Plains unit. In 1996, we started seeing a greater use of splits and zonings in relation to longer season lengths and extended seasons into January, and to account for some of the shifting migration patterns and diverse hunting preferences. In 2011, the Southeast Zone was created. Again, as part of these migration patterns, also division among hunter preferences. Slide, please. As previously noted, Kansas currently has two, back up one, please. As previously noted, Kansas currently has 2 hunting units, the High and Low Plains, separated by Highway 283. Within the Low Plains unit, there is 3 duck zones, early, late, and southeast. As each name of the zones implies, they are based off the season structure. Within each season, the season has 2 segments. These segments are used to extend the 74 allotted hunting days through the entire migration period. So this all leads to today's and next several commission meetings to develop appropriate duck zone boundaries that best serve Kansas for the next 5 years. Of course, we must abide that the zones may be contiguous, and they are only allowed for the regular duck season period, so this not include general till seasons or any other special harvest areas. The High and Low Plain boundary is not eligible for reconfiguration during these discussions, and these boundaries are set for every 5 years. I would like to remind you that season dates are set on an annual basis, though. Next slide, please. So zones must fit in one of 4 options, and currently we are operating under number 3, where we have no more than 3 zones with the option for 1 split or 2 segments for each area. With today's process initiating the zone configuration discussion, duck zones will be a part of the next few agenda meetings. Commissions will adopt new configurations for Fish and Wildlife Service prior to August 1st. Implementation of the new configurations will not be in place until the 2026 hunting season. And again, thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Tom. We have questions from the commission? Questions from the audience? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Oh,
I do have one hand raised, Chairman. Mr. Richardson, I'm going to unmute you here.
Hello, I'm here.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, I have a general comment, and I thank you commissioners for listening. I live in southeast Rice County. We have noticed we've had a really large increase in our deer population the last few years. And I feel like that maybe we're getting slighted here in the southeast part of Unit 6. It just seems like it's pretty inconsistent that we are only allowed 1 whitetail antlerless permit per hunter. And just a few miles away in almost every direction, they're allowed to have 5. I'm seeing a lot of crop damage in my area. And I just think that we ought to have, if we could get more permits, we might be able to cut that population down a bit. I would encourage that we at least get 1 more permit in our area, if not 4 or 5, like are in most of the adjoining areas. If you look at the map of the units, it seems like the whole central part of the state, except for our unit and far out west, has many more whitetail antlerless permits than we can get. And I just like to see that increased, or at least look at that. we are seeing herds of 20, 30, 40 deer with regularity, and just not going to help much to cut them down if we can't shoot any more of them and take any more of them than that. I would also, I was kind of encouraged because this year, for the first year in several, the second season that typically starts on New Year's Day, for several years, we were allowed New Year's Day, and that was it. This year, at least we had 3 days, but no more permits. So that's my comment, and I thank you for listening, and I thank you for the opportunity to address that. I hope that some kind of action will be taken to address that inconsistency. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. I would invite staff to comment, but not at this point in time. If they choose to do so, we are wrapping up the waterfowl season with Mr. Bedrowski. And so I would ask if there are any questions specific to what his presentation was. If not, thank you very much, Tom. We do have another public comment coming up. We now have a workshop session on 2025 deer seasons and military units, followed by big game regulations from Levi Jaster. Thank you, Levi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Levi Jaster, Emporia, Kansas, the Research and Survey Office. So just a quick comment in regards to Mr. Richardson's comments. He jumped the gun a little bit. We're going to talk about that today, just in a minute. So I will start with KR 115-25-9A, which is our military subunit deer seasons. We work with the Department of Defense staff at those locations to look at what seasons they would like to see for management on their property, and to be able to work around the DoD's needs for training activities and such that sometimes would preclude being able to have hunters out there during our regular statewide seasons. General kind of working with this, they can have typically as many days as we have in a statewide season regarding like rifle and such. And then within good reason, we've added other things too that made sense with them. But then they also at times have requested fewer days than statewide seasons in some cases. Generally, they follow the statewide seasons with the exceptions of what's listed in this regulation. And so I'll work through those exceptions quickly here. So at Fort Riley, in addition to the pre-rut antlerless whitetail deer season for Unit 8A, they want some additional seasons days from November 28th through November 30th. And then their open firearm season would be December 13th through December 21st. And then they want to be, their extended season in January for antlerless whitetail only is January 1st, 2026 to January 11th. And they would like to have 3 antlerless permits be valid on their subunit 8A. Moving to Fort Leavenworth. Fort Leavenworth wants to split out their firearm season. So their firearm season would be November 15th through November 16th, November 22nd through November 23rd, November 27th through what should be November 30th, and then December 6th through December 7th, and December 13th through December 14th. And then they typically participate in the longest January whitetail antlerless only season from January 1st through January 18th would be their dates. And then they take advantage of the extended archery season that's up in that area from January 19th through January 31st with the full 5 antlerless permits valid there. And then Smoky Hill will follow statewide seasons and would have the full 5 antlerless permits that are valid in subunit 4A. So again, this is numbers put together between the department and staff at those facilities. And with that, I would take questions.
Any questions from the commissioners? Any questions from the audience? Thank you, Levi.
All right. So I'll move on to 115-25-9 with the big game regulations. Briefly about the briefing book item, I did put in our dates for the upcoming seasons. Those dates are set through, we've got durable language in this regulation. We don't have to do this every year now. But we're looking at this specifically because we do want to adjust what deer management units fall under what seasons. So this will be addressing some of what Mr. Richardson was asking about. Unit 6. We'll cover that now. Working from my presentation. All right, so our current January whitetail antlerless only seasons, this is how the state breaks down right now. In red down there in Unit 18, there's no antlerless only season, no valid whitetail antlerless only permits. In units 6, 8, 9, 10, which is a little difficult to see because it's partly covered by Unit 19, and DMU 17 down in Southwest Kansas are all in our short season, which typically is the first week of January. We did adjust because we were getting some of those seasons were based on the way we had worked with the calendar in the past where we got 1 or 2 days. Now the way we set that, we have a minimum 3 days for that short season. And then, but it could be up to 7 to 8, depending on how the calendar falls and when the first Sunday appears in January. Because we did have many places where people were unhappy that they were only getting 1 day in that season. So give them a few more. And then in the light green color, that is our medium length season. So generally about 2 weeks in January, the first couple weeks. And then there's 5 antlerless only permits available in those units. And then in the dark green, which is units 12, 13, and 15 down there in South Central, Southeast Kansas, and unit 19 up in the Kansas City area. It's the long season, which is typically about the first 3 weeks of January, plus 5 whitetail antlerless only permits. Unit 19 is the urban antlerless zone. It's set up to try to increase harvest along the I-70 corridor, and then a lot of those urban areas with Kansas City out to Topeka. And it only applies to the whitetail antlerless only hunting and doe permits. Any buck permits are handled under the full unit 10 that 19 takes up a good chunk of. Or the other unit, because it does cover some of unit 11, 14, and 9 bits and pieces too. So the potential adjustments we're looking at, and I will show you each individual unit after this, but just to get to a general idea, outlined in red out there in the western quarter of the state would be potentially moving towards no antlerless only permits and no January season at all with low deer numbers. We had kept the numbers in much of that, especially up in Northwest Kansas and units 1 and 2 in that part, open more under for chronic wasting disease, trying to do some additional harvest, whereas other states might have gone to potentially sharpshooting or something like that. With the spread of CWD, it's much more effective to let hunters do that out there. But drought then came in with that and reduced the deer population probably more effectively than we could ever have hoped for otherwise. Unit 3 then would go to just 1 permit, and I'll cover why that one would just go to 1. And then outlined in the same kind of light green, although it's covered up by the dark green, but units 6, 8, 9, and 10 would be moving towards the medium length and 5 permits. And potentially looking at in the dark green, we'd move units 11 and 14 into the long season also, and upping the number of permits allowed to hunters in that area to potentially 10. We've discussed even going unlimited, but we're not sure where we'd fall, but definitely we'd like to increase the number of permits in that area. So I'm going to work through these units kind of by the groups that I just talked about. So we'll start with those western units. We'll go to unit 3. We'll cover those northeast units and then down into the southeast. But now I'm going to go with, we've got some updated, we finished our deer population survey through Spotlight use in this last fall. And so now I've been able to put those numbers together to where we can see what that looks like. And then look at the counting last year, look at the last 5 years. And so with these graphs, the dark line, the black line is the density estimates. The red line is the 5-year average across those years. And then the blue line is the 5-year trend. And generally these graphs run from a density of 0 to 30 per square mile, though there's a couple that bump because in Southeast Kansas, the survey indicated it was even higher than that. But starting with unit 1, we've been really low the last few years. We did come up a little bit this year, which is a fair chance that was a lot better habitat we saw in the last year out there with getting a little rain finally. But we'd like to still move down to no antlerless season and no valid antlerless only permits out there just to try to help maybe hold some of that if we can. It also goes in with what generally what we're hearing from our hunters and landowners out there that we should be reducing things to. Unit 2 is kind of the same story, generally low, coming through the drought. A little bit of gain this last year with a little better conditions out there, but still staying low. And even in this case, just a very tiny downward trend still over that time. Unit 17 is basically the same condition of all the rest of it, except in that case, we had kept, that had been in the short season. So, and with only 1 permit, and we weren't seeing any change there. So try to go with no antlerless permits and no January season in hopes that maybe that will move the needle more instead. Generally, a lot of Western Kansas, we're really reliant on getting timely rains to have good habitat for deer out there. But now that we've had a little bit of good conditions coming, I think it'd be a good time to start thinking about backing off to let deer take advantage of those good conditions. Whereas when you start hitting into bad conditions, sometimes it's advantageous to even take advantage of some extra harvest so that what animals you do have left have a better chance of making it through on the limited resources. But now with some better conditions and with what our hunters and landowners would like to see too, it'd be moving towards none. Unit 3 is kind of the same thing. In fact, if you would get a little bit back even more, populations are even a little higher than this. We kind of strung along. But in unit 3, some of what we see is that eastern edge, higher numbers on that east edge keep the kind of cover up low numbers on the western part of that unit. And so we're still getting folks wanting us to reduce numbers up there quite a bit. And so, but rather than go all the way to nothing or no option for an antlerless season antlerless tag because of those little higher numbers on the east side, we'll still keep some tags in there to let folks be able to use those if they like to. And then, but then also in that area, if we have any crop damage that occurs where locations where there are higher numbers, we'd in this case rather take care of that through our deer control permitting process rather than keep everything too high for the whole area during it to that time. You go to the next slide, please. All right, unit 6, we did see a drop this year from where we were, but we had been quite a ways up there. And we did have a major increase in the number of deer control permit requests in the last couple of years out there. And generally when I work from these, you can see that 5-year trend is still upward, even though we've dipped here from a peak a couple of years ago. That's why we work from the 3 to 5 year trends on this. We don't look at a single year's estimate too, because 1 year could be affected solely by the conditions when the survey is able to run. But when we look at the trends over time, we start seeing that. And so in unit 6, we'd like to bump from that short and 1 antlerless permit to the medium and 5 antlerless permits. Really what we see in the effectiveness of adding 1 or 2 permits isn't generally adding 5 works. Well, generally most of our deer hunters buy 1 to 2 permits at the most. But when you add in 5, only people that have a lot of deer locally are buying that many permits. Hunters actually aren't bad about self-regulating at all in many cases, but so it would be a bump to the full 5 to give those folks the opportunity to take care of their problem too, and another week of season to hunt also. It's kind of the same story across the, back to 8, please. 8's kind of the same way. Our numbers were, that's 6 again, 8. Same way we're down a little bit this year, but we've been trending upward again. And so, increasing number of crop damage complaints, people looking for additional opportunity when we can give it to them, in this case, without any other ill effects would be great. So that would be a change from the short and 1 to the medium and 5. And if we could, next slide. 9's kind of the same story. It's been increasing over the last few years, a little drop this year. Looking at how we've seen that across several of our units, I'm going to suspect that what we're seeing is a little bit of a weather effect this year. We had some pretty warm, nice days during the, when we were doing the survey, which doesn't necessarily encourage deer to be out and moving in the dark to feed as much. And we're also potentially a little better habitat with some rain here and there. And so it can be hard to even see deer in some of those cases. But again, bumping that up in unit 9. Go to the 10s, again, the same story. We've been trending upwards the last few years. And so providing some more opportunity and to get people to start hopefully harvesting deer before we get, population too high on this case. Next slide, please. Unit 11's been quite a ways up there the last few years. So, we want to move them out of the medium length season and 5 antlerless only permits, move them to long, give them an extra week, and then also, double or at least additional opportunity with whitetail antlerless only permits. I actually spoke to a landowner out of Crawford County yesterday that wanted me to close down the coyote season for a couple of years so the coyotes could take care of fawns for himself. But so there's, we're getting fair comments, and I've been down into some of those areas to visit with landowners and see some of their properties and some of the damage and stuff. And so bolstering our numbers up and giving some more opportunity there. So next slide will be unit 12. Unit 12 is already in the long season, but they've been under the 5 antlerless only permits. So the real change in this unit would be that we'd bump to more permits for those folks too. But again, there's lots of deer down in southeast Kansas. We know this. 13's kind of the same story again, bumps up. You see there's a little bit of, potential variation from year to year, but generally the trend is upward there. And so they're currently in the long also with 5 permits. So their change would just be to going to 10 permits. 14, same story. Numbers have been up, down, but generally trending upwards over time. And, same increasing number of crop damage complaints. Generally across all these units in Southeast too, we see increase in our deer vehicle accident metrics too that I monitored. But 14 would be a change of an extra week by moving into the long season and then additional permits too. And then unit 15, large part of that's Wichita. It's a lot of urban areas that can be difficult to get access to hunt down in that area. They're already under the long with 5, but we want to bump to 10 permits there. So Next slide, please. And then 19, which again is only the doe permits. They're already in the long with five permits, but now that general trend upward that we're seeing, it's kind of very similar to the southern half of Unit 15 in that it's very urban. It's very difficult to get access to hunt in that area. This would also provide a little more opportunity for some of our urban deer programs to have some more permits available to address some of their issues where we, in a couple of cases, had been having to issue some special permits to those folks just to be able to help them with their control in those places and for more of a safety issue type thing. But their change again would be up to 10 permits for that area. Last slide. And so this is what the map would now look like if this is the route we take. And, I would expect to see a, proposal from the department here soon regarding some of this once we've worked it through. But this is kind of the way we're leaning anyways, considering it. So that western quarter of the state would be, no antlerless permits, no January season, try to recover our population some there. Unit 3 bumping down to for that similar reason. And then, moving that kind of that south central up through the north central and northeast to where there's a little more opportunity, a few more tags available. And then southeast where we've got our highest deer numbers to give them as much opportunity as we can with as more tags to where folks that have deer issues can try to address them with additional hunting opportunities too. So that's my last slide on this. And so I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Levi. A question I would have, obviously you'll evaluate this every year, but would you change it every year? Would you change it? Bring recommendations according to need or population changes?
We try to bring these according to need. It's better if we can not address them every year so that we're not constantly jumping our regulations around for hunters. But if we would say move to something that happened back in 2011, 2012, we had a major hemorrhagic disease outbreak that really hit our deer populations in eastern Kansas at the time. And if seeing something like that to where we'd see something that happened that distinctly affected our population, or if we start seeing, a couple years trends over time, in a direction we don't want it to go, then we'd come back to change it again. But generally it's nice to keep those in place at least a couple of years. And the other part of it too is that in a single year, we could just have really terrible weather during the season that could affect what happens. And so having a couple or 3 years of information can make a much more informed decision that's not just a knee-jerk reaction to what's going on, what we've seen. And then we also have a lot of pieces of information that we take into account when we look at this, because we look at the population abundance, we look at sex ratios, deer vehicle accidents, reproduction rates, crop damage complaints. We've got a landowner deer opinion survey that we do every few years. I look at evaluating comments from hunters and then all the comments that come in the rest of the year regarding deer numbers and such. Deer disease, habitat conditions across the board. So there's a lot to look at. And some parts of that equation can change drastically from year to year. Some of it doesn't change very much. And so it's, all the parts together is what we're trying to base our decisions off of.
Thank you. Other commissioners have questions? Anyone from the audience have a question of Levi? Okay, thank you, Levi.
Thank you.
Actually, just for clarification on the military, I maybe made this clear, but at this point, we're going to go forward with promulgation and bring that before the commission. That one's such a timely matter. We need to get it in the process.
Sure.
We have it in place. So just to be abundantly clear, we're going to move into promulgating the military deer season. Is that okay with the commission? I don't know if they have.
Yeah, does that come back to us at our next meeting, or does that move on through the reg process?
It'll enter into the reg process and then I will get it back ideally well in advance of the season so that the commission can vote on it, approve it, hopefully approve it so that it's in place for the following season.
Very good. Any questions of that process from any of the commissioners? Thank you very much, Curtis. Okay, item number 11, we're back to general public comments. Anyone been motivated to come up and speak that weren't before? Now is your opportunity. No one online, Jason?
Nope, no one with their hands raised or anything.
We have old business. Is there any old business to bring up, Curtis?
Not that I'm aware of. No.
Other business to bring up? Don't believe so. Future meeting dates and locations. We're in Topeka in a couple of months, I believe.
Correct. The March one will be in Topeka. Our hope was to set the April one back in Russell since we pulled this one from Russell. However, I think we're working with Megan's working on establishing that time, but we're having a hard time getting the venue there for April. We might have to go to Russell at a later date. Is that correct, Megan?
Yes, the current Russell does not have very many options for
Come to my house.
places that we can hold a meeting of this size. And our current date is their meetings, our reading room is unavailable. So we would need to either move the date or the location.
Right. And from what I understand, talking to our waterfowl folks, that late April date is important because that it comes right before when we need to get the feds, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, our numbers for waterfowl. So if the commission has any suggestions on where they want to meet in April, we'd love to hear them. If anybody has a preference?
Kansas City's a lovely town.
It is. I know we were just in the lovely county of Wyandotte. So, but yeah, if not, we can find a location, but I just wanted to ask if anybody had a suggestion.
Fall River, Kansas will host you anytime.
We'll consider that. That's a good idea.
Can you tell me the dates again? I'm sorry.
It's late. We just have it set for late April at this point.
Oh, okay.
Megan, do you have a date in particular?
April 24th.
What about March? Said March.
The March meeting will be
Oh, March 27th. It's there, sorry.
27th. Yes, sorry.
Curtis, we did have an email that I never got sent to you about Geary County would be interested in hosting a meeting.
Okay.
I'll give you their information afterwards.
Yeah, please do send that along.
Any other business to come before? I'm going to ask our commissioners for closing remarks. I'm going to start with Commissioner Carpenter, who looks like he's back online. Do you have any comments you would like to make about the discussion today, or anything you missed out we can recreate for you if you'd like? I don't see him unmuting, so perhaps not. I'll start to my right this time. Commissioner Rydell, do you have any comments?
No, just thank you everybody for coming and thank the staff for their time and all the good information today.
Yep, same thing. I'd encourage the public, I don't know how many are left here right now, but to attend these meetings, we need to hear from you on all these matters because they're not easy. And we appreciate the work of the staff and the information we get there.
But no, I appreciate the open discussion. There's obviously when people are passionate about certain topics, there's going to be a disagreement on opinions. The bedrock of our democracy actually is the ability to openly discuss and have public discourse. But I will say personally, I've tried to show the commissioners, my fellow commissioners, all respect, both when we're meeting and otherwise, and to have, Commissioner Lister personally attack me because she apparently disagrees with my position. I felt to be very unprofessional, and I would admonish her from doing that in the future. And I would hope the commission and the secretary would speak openly that we do not have that type of unprofessional behavior among commissioners. I'm good.
I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Echo some of the remarks made. I appreciate everyone who came out today. I appreciate the staff time, the travels that you all made. The people who have taken the time, our guests who come here and offered comments or take something away and talk to your friends and family and others who are interested in wildlife and parks, as well as the many number of people who are available online. And appreciate the commission and staff putting up agendas and contact information on all of us that we can be found online on the Wildlife and Parks website. And I know we all receive phone calls and emails. We appreciate it, and we'll see you in Topeka in a couple of months. Thank you so much. Meeting is adjourned.
One thing I forgot to raise, and I don't know